Sorry, Nigel, just remind you to turn your microphone on.
I beg your pardon. I thought it was on. Right, first item on our agenda to receive apologies for absence. I got two, I think, from Councillor Housden and Councillor Peter Fisher. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
And Councillor Adams. Thank you. Thank you for that. Item 3 on our agenda, public questions and statements. I'm not aware of it.
I'm received.
Thank you. Item 4 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of September in the council chamber at 9:30. So starting with the first page for accuracy, if we can please. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Everybody comfortable that they are a true and accurate reflection of that meeting? Okay. Can I have a proposer then, please? And a seconder. So that's Councillor Brown and Councillor Heinrich. And a vote, please. Show of hands. Thank you. That looks unanimous to me. Thank you. I will therefore sign them as such. Thank you. Items of urgent business.
None received.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest in accordance with the guide that's in our papers today? No. Okay, thank you. Item 7, petitions from members of the public.
None received.
Thank you. Item 8 is consideration of any matter referred to the committee by a member. I'm not aware of it.
Again, none received.
Thank you. Item 9 is responses of the council or the cabinet to the committee reports or recommendations.
Yeah, we just have a response there from Sean Knight. Just on there was a question raised at the last meeting in relation to the types of businesses that were considered for NDR write-offs, to see if there was any patterns there. So you see the information. I think his general response was that there was no clear kind of correlation between that. It seems to be any businesses. I don't know if anyone has any questions on that they want to put further, but it seems to kind of close off that inquiry.
I think Councillor Withington, I think if my memory serves me correct, it was you that raised that, and it looks to me, and according to the email that I saw originally, there is no trend as such. It's fairly well distributed across the sectors, but a worthy question and well worth considering the whether there was any common ground there. So thank you for that. Right, turning then to item 10, the first substantive item on our agenda today is the People Services restructure. So that's pages 11 to 24 in our papers. Councillor Fredericks, do we have Councillor Fredericks here today? No. Do we have any member of Cabinet able to field on this one? Councillor Seward.
Thank you very much, Chairman. You've got officers here today to present this, and this has been through. The object of this people's restructure, it has to be also looked into, aligned to and in connection with the use of housing reserves to enhance delivery. the council has been holding for some time £2.5 million of reserves under the housing category. And the Cabinet was anxious that we should start to use those reserves and not just leave them sitting there. So there was a twin approach to this. A was to strengthen the services that we provide to people in housing difficulty and great housing need, whether it's homelessness or people in urgent need on the housing register. There was also the issue of people claiming or seeking disability facilities grants, and the numbers involved actually going up rather than down. So it was to provide greater support to that. These are not posts which are in the base budget. They are for a specific period, and it's also to help generate income or to make better advantage of various grants that come along to deal with some of these housing need categories. So that's the context in which this people services restructure has been done. Looking away to my left, I'm seeing there's a range of housing officers here today. So they are in a position to add to what I have said, to amplify it, and also to answer the committee's questions.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps before I invite others to speak, you hopefully will have seen an email that I circulated late yesterday, which covered a number of questions that were put to the Chief Executive, because the Chief Executive provided an overview, I suppose, of these two pieces of business, knowing that he was going to be away. So I put a number of questions to him in response to that overview. Officer Hill kindly responded to those, and so the questions and the answers have been circulated, and I hope everyone on the committee has seen those and had an opportunity to read and digest those. And I hope in some ways that's a bit of a starter for 10 for us today, in the sense that maybe it has addressed some of the questions and may have proposed some other questions in your mind. But I thought that that was a way in which to perhaps get the ball rolling in the absence of the Chief Executive and the leader today. So are there any issues that anybody wants to raise from those questions that have already been submitted, or are you happy to move on to your own? Okay, I'll assume the silence to mean that you're happy to move on to your own. So, any questions then on what Councillor Seawood has said already? Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in Cabinet, this causes me some concern indeed. Often every quarter we come to Cabinet, we get performance reports. When we look at those performance reports, they are a sea of green, which indicates everything is going along swimmingly in terms of service delivery. Yet we are presented today with a request to spend over £700,000 on additional salaries, if you take into account the role that is included in the housing strategy section in order to improve performance. So that just strikes a bit of a contradiction, why we actually need additional roles there, when according to the statistics that we've presented to the Cabinet and to this committee, things look proceeding well on that front. Councillor Seawood mentions in here, and it's also mentioned in the report, that one element of these roles will actually generate some income. Well, there's no actually metrics in there that I've seen actually says what the cost benefit of that would actually be. So I'd be interested to know actually what that actually is. But standing up is the overall principle that you have this. It seems to me, if you look in here, some of this money is being given to people to create promotions. If you look at the appendix on page 21, it looks to me like we are putting in an additional layer of management. Now, you'll recall, Mr. Chairman, when the council proposed the restructure to create the director roles, and we'd already got an additional layer of management in there, which we were told at the time they were needed to do strategic thinking. When I see in the papers here, we need an extra row of managers who can also spend some time doing more strategic thinking. So what actually seems to me is that more managers makes the organisation more efficient. Well, that's a new one on me, I have to say. In my experience, flattening the structure makes organisations more efficient. You get a decision made by the chief executive has less barriers to pass through in order to get those actually on the front line. So I'm really rather bemused to understand that we actually need extra layer of management in there. And also comes to another point I would make. I think we are coming up to the 3rd anniversary of the Liberal Democrat group taking control of this council. I have to say, in my 2.5 years here so far, I've heard precious little about any efficiencies actually being made. And normally when you look at improving organisations, the first thing you do is actually how can you streamline them, how can you make them more efficient? You do not actually just say, right, then we'll just throw more people at it. And it seems to me that what I'm getting from Councillor Seaward is that we have a big pot of money there that hasn't been spent. Therefore, we will actually just go and find a way to go and spend that, distribute that largesse among the staff. That seems fundamentally wrong to me. At the end of the day, this is taxpayers' money. It may not have come from a council tax, but it certainly came from taxation somewhere. Every penny this council has comes from taxation somewhere, and fundamentally we should be very mindful of how we spend that. I haven't seen anything in here that gives us a cogent example of actually why we need to spend more money on this. I do have one, so my point is actually fattening the structure seems to be fundamentally wrong. So I'd wait for some observations. I do have one final question, but I'll pause there in case anyone, Councillor Seaward or any officer wants to respond to the points I just made.
Thank you.
Well, I'll make one or two initial responses. Of the figure of nearly 700,000 is used for extra staff. Well, it's about 650. 164,000 pounds of that is for existing posts which would have been spent anyway. There's nothing new in there whatsoever. So the actual sum on new posts over 2 years is 486,000 pounds. That is about £1 in 4 of the overall proposals to spend on housing. So the idea that we're fattening and just spending money on staff, iggly-piggly, we don't care about taxpayers' money, just isn't true. The answers, Mr. Chairman, that have been given to you have set out, in my view, quite comprehensively the reasons why we need to provide further support in order to provide a better service, A, to people seeking disability facilities grants, but also those in dire housing need. And I would have thought that that is something that the Conservative group would want to actually do. That's the position. And you cannot provide these services simply on thin air. You do actually have to have some coordination and management involved in order to provide support to staff. And some of the staff that are dealing with housing allocation cases and people in housing need are actually occupying some of the most stressful positions within the council. I know from my own experience of dealing with housing cases that some of those over the years that have caused me most anguish, most concern and most stress have been housing cases, because you're actually dealing with people in desperate situations. So these are very stressful positions, and the officers dealing with them do need proper management and actual support. So that's my initial reaction to what's been said. But I think in terms of some of the more specific points, I'll leave that to officers.
Just turning to the officer.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Seward for recognising the impact that dealing with this difficult customer group has on staff. And I think, although it's perhaps not expressed in the restructure report, because there's a lot to cover in that report, and it was perhaps one of the details that we didn't actually put into that report. But one of the key reasons for introducing these team leader posts at the expense of officer posts, because for the most part the team leader posts that we have brought in are temporary 2-year fixed term contracts, with the expectation that it will be people who will step up from other roles within the team, and their roles will not be backfilled. And it's a recognition that because of additional burdens that we've had, some additional staff have been brought in very much on again fixed term contracts with money from government. And it is incredibly difficult to make sure that you can give the support to those staff if you don't have the right staff to team leader ratio. And so that's one of the things that we set out to achieve in this restructure, to give balance across all of the teams within people services. And we spoke to HR about what they thought was an appropriate balance in terms of how many people one team leader should be expected to have supervisory responsibility for. If we are, want to ensure that we supervise our staff appropriately and we support them with their development and training, we have a check-in process that takes up quite a lot of time to manage. And with the service managers, without having any supervisory team leader support below them, it was meaning they were spending a significant amount of their time undertaking check-ins and not having the time to do the strategic work that we wanted them to do. So that was one of the key things. I think in terms of our performance, we are proud of our performance, and I think we have generally performed well against the metrics that are there. I think there's a case to provide some stretch on those, and in order to do that, we do need to acknowledge that we need more resource and capacity, not only just in terms of staff, but initiatives as well for those staff to deliver. So we will be looking at stretch targets. We will be looking at developing our services. We want to move from dealing with crisis, which is not helpful for the customer, it's not helpful for our teams and our staff, it's not helpful for our reputation as a council. We want to move to prevention, and to do that you need people who can work with residents on a one-to-one basis to achieve a solution that is bespoke to them. We don't want to offer a one size fits all service. We want it to be bespoke to the individual and to try and help them to realise an outcome that they want. So this is why we've put this staffing structure in place. It is only a temporary structure. It's 2 years. We felt that this was an opportunity to try something different to that we had traditionally utilised, which was to bring in additional staff in at the officer level. But I think the effectiveness of doing that, we haven't optimise the effectiveness of those staff coming in because we haven't had that supervisory element there. We've had a really difficult year, 18 months with COVID, and we know that things are not going to improve anytime soon. So the staff that you're talking about in terms of people services are dealing with COVID and trying to get services back on track as well. So we feel that we need to use the money that's been given to us by government, recognising that there are extra burdens that they've placed upon us in recent years. This money is to reflect on the direction the government wants us to go into, which is bring rough sleepers in off the streets, prevent homelessness, place people into better quality temporary accommodation. They've given us the money to do this, and this is the money that we're spending to realise both their objectives and our objectives as a council too.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Lloyd, was you was your point in connection with this?
Thank you, Chair. It's actually in response to Councillor Cushing's comments. Full council last month, Councillor Cushing accused this administration of lacking ambition. Well, Councillor Cushing, this is an example of what this administration can deliver. We're not going to sit in our hands. We're going to do whatever we can to address the housing need in this district. Something close to my heart is energy and insulation, and this winter we're going to see predicted that there'll be much fuel poverty right across the country, not least of all here. So employing an energy officer to address those issues is entirely appropriate in my view. And this all comes on a background of rising claims to this housing department, and we're addressing it. And you know, I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Cushing, before I move on to the next point, just picking up on the responses made so far, do you wish to respond yourself?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'm sure all councillors appreciate the work the housing team do, and I'd say, Councillor Seawood, you're not the only one talking to residents who have concerns about that. I certainly do as well, and I have to say the support I've been received from the housing team has been extremely good indeed. So it's no criticism of that, but it's our duty as councillors to challenge everything that is put forward by officers and the administration to make sure that their taxpayers' money is being well spent. One question I would have, I don't see in here, it said the ratio of managers to staff, so I didn't see any statistic in here as actually what that ratio is, so I would be interested to hear, before I move on, what that ratio is, please. Sorry, I can't hear you.
So we're looking at somewhere around 6 officers to a team leader.
Well, I have to say, in my experience in a different industry, is that is very low indeed. I mean, where I come from, it would normally be 15, 20 to that level of manager. So I do think that was worth a challenge and a look at. And certainly, if this a council has been run by a Conservative administration, that's certainly some hard questions we would have on that front. Also, I want to understand, so we're spending an awful lot of money here. And I think you probably picked up in your questions, Mr. Chairman, about what measures we're going to get. If you're going to spend money, then you would expect a return, some specific measurables, improved performance measures in terms of what we're going to get for that additional spend. I have to say, I haven't had time, it only just came through this morning, Mr. Jones, I haven't had a chance to digest this in detail, but I want something I do think we do actually need to look at. Another point actually made is, one thing I did made is around efficiencies. We were told we needed a director level in order to focus on strategic thinking. Now we're told we need another level of managers in order to focus on more strategic thinking, but I do not recall ever seeing, or very little in the time here, about actually improving the processes and making it more efficient. And normally that's the first place you look before you actually look to spend any money in order to recruit more staff. In terms of that. The other thing, as a final point I'd like to make, is these are fixed term contracts. So what happens in 2 years' time? We are promoting people. Are we actually going, is there an expectation in 2 years' time we're actually going to demote them if these are only temporary posts? In my experience, that seldom happens. So the concern is here that we're paying money out of reserves now. 2 years' time, there'll probably be an expectation those will be paid out of the base budget as well, which will obviously increase the overall costs to the council. So I think that's further cause for concern. There is one other question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, in terms of that. Looking at this item we're talking around here, around the people restructure and the housing restructure, they are defined as being key decisions as defined in the Constitution. So can you advise me whether any aspect of these decisions have already been actioned, and if so, when?
So just in terms of the staff to officer ratio, it is something that we have discussed with our HR department. I think it is more typical in local government, and certainly in terms of the type of service that we're delivering, where we are dealing with very complex cases, emotive issues, people in quite desperate circumstances, and we need to ensure that our staff their mental well-being is supported, because it can be quite a burden to take on, particularly people who are dealing with cases out of hours as well. So I think you have to look at the type of work that they're doing. It won't be the same across all of the teams within the council, but the people services teams specifically, I think that ratio is appropriate. In terms of the 2-year, so the if people move up into one of these posts that's a temporary fixed term post, they will have a substantive post to go back to. So yes, the possibility is, I don't like the word demoted. What I like to think of it as is an opportunity for people to step up and develop themselves and gain some experience. I think it's quite important to make sure that we have succession planning, and this is one opportunity for people to use that experience either as a springboard to then apply for a job that might become available either within the teams or elsewhere in the council, or possibly even in another organisation. But I think it's if we continue to receive government funding, there is a possibility that we can continue with those posts if they prove to be successful, and we will have metrics in place to make sure that they are delivering what we expect them to deliver. So I think those are the 2 key points. This is something I've not covered.
My final question, if I can repeat it again. This decision and the one on the housing strategy are defined as key decisions based on the definition in the Constitution. So I just wanted to advise whether any aspect of these decisions have been actioned so far, if so, when?
So we haven't actioned any of the decisions specifically. We have been preparing processes in place ready to action them. So in terms of the restructure, we have job descriptions prepared. We have evaluation, job evaluation dates in the diary. We have asked for expressions of interest for the benefits team leader post, because we are running a recruitment campaign in respect of a permanent post that became vacant recently. So it made sense as part of an efficiency to run those 2 together. But we are mindful that no offer of a post will be made probably for another 3 weeks or at least. So no decisions have been actioned as such yet. But we are proposing to keep on, moving with the, unless we're advised to not do so.
So can I just ask, what would be the first action you are going to take as a result of that then? So presumably we go through this committee today.
So the recruitment process is planned and will continue unless I'm advised to cease that recruitment process.
Okay, thank you. I've got quite a list building at the moment. So I've got Councillor Blaithwaite, Councillor Holliday and Councillor Gay. Councillor Blaithwaite.
Thank you. This is more for the officer again, but I'd just like to say I think Councillor Cushing is confusing the selling of widgets to the actual business of saving people's lives. The very essence of their lives is their housing. And we are about to enter a phase, I think even the most optimistic person would say, is going to be dire for people on the edges of our society who we are looking to help. and to fail to release this money, £2.5 million, to aid these people would seem to me incredibly irresponsible. And if by enlarging the management structure for a 2-year period, we'll release this money, surely this is good action. And I would ask the officer, does she feel confident she is getting her ducks in a row so she will be in a good position to relieve these people of their dire consequences of the actions of the present government? Thank you.
Ducks in a row.
Thank you. Since I took this post up in February, I've worked with the service managers in people services, and I, hand on heart can say that we share a value in terms of we care passionately about the customers that we deliver services to, and we want to do the best for them. And this restructure has come about from putting all of our minds together to look to see what is the best possible option. And we don't want to stop there. We want to look to see what further opportunities there are to work together across those services, because the prevention ethos is what we all care deeply about. We don't want to be processing benefit claims. We want to try to remove people out of benefit dependency, but we recognise that that's where we are at the moment, and we need to move upstream in terms of prevention. We don't want to place people into temporary accommodation. We don't want people who have suffered domestic abuse to go into refuge accommodation. We want them to have solutions that we can find for them that help them to continue with their lives, support, their kids to continue in the same school, keep the same jobs, live locally to their family. That's not happening at the moment. And all of us, it's difficult when we can't do the best for people. So I think this is going to be a really, really positive move for all of the staff within people services to be able to see what we can really do and achieve. And it will be incremental. There are some risks to this process. We don't know at this moment in time how many of our staff are going to look to step up into those roles. We don't know for the external recruitment whether we'll be able to recruit. It's a very difficult recruitment market. So we will face some challenges, but we will do the very best that we can. And yes, I do believe we've got our ducks lined up.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. I've got every sympathy for the poor people who are needing your help, and for the people who are giving it. I'm from a similar background, and I know how wearing it can be. But I was just expecting more metrics and more of an outcome focus, because if we need X number of houses in for X number of people, then I would have expected that to be in this paper, and I would have more comfort about authorising this spend if I understood that this was much more of an outcome focus than process. Because to me, we have, as Christopher, like Councillor Cushing has said, we have a lot of strategy and output. And for the energy officer and the community enabler, I think some of those outputs are very unambitious. And if we're looking to invest more in those areas, I would expect a bit more for it. And I've got one more point, if I may. Yeah. We have some risks cited in the outturn report. Only one of those crosses over, that's the temporary accommodation one, but we also have risks cited for the housing benefit subsidy and the business rates retention. So I just wondered if it wasn't wise just to consider what we might need to keep for covering those risks rather than spending it all on investing in new roles. Thank you.
Okay. Who wants to pick those up?
I don't know if Lucy might want to comment. I am aware that as a council we are holding a significant amount of reserves which will enable us to cover off other risks. I think that if we hold the money to cover off those risks, that we do everything possible to manage anyway, that we're not going to be able to have the opportunities to deliver the preventative services that we're looking to deliver, which probably are the best opportunities opportunity for us to reduce our dependency on a very, very expensive temporary accommodation, reduce our costs, and a significant amount of the housing benefit subsidy element comes from the fact that we aren't able to recover 100% of subsidy on temporary accommodation. In fact, it's a very small percentage that we are able to recover. So if we are able to bring into place better quality temporary accommodation, not only will it have a significant impact on the lives of those placed in temporary accommodation, but it will be positive for our financial situation as well. So I think it's about looking to use the money that the government has given to us for the purpose it's given it to us, and delivering that prevention agenda, which will have cost benefits, but also benefits that you can't quantify because they're about quality of life.
I'm just conscious that our list is growing quite long, and we will, by the time we get to the end speaker, have spent quite a bit of time on this topic. So I'm reluctant to take any more speakers. I've got Councillor Gay, Councillor Penfold and Councillor Adams. So, and we've got, right, okay. Let's make it as quick as we can then, please, because I think otherwise time is going to be getting away. Okay, so Councillor Gay.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to support what Karen Hill has said about the nature of the work that has been done, which Councillor Holliday has acknowledged. This is work in dealing with people who are in extremis and have a number of problems, not just one that can be solved with an email. So there's that, and I think those of us who have been through, for example, the self-prescribing workshop, the housing workshops, we know that, and we do appreciate that. After many, many years of sitting in scrutiny meetings, Chairman, I'd also like to say that this paper is extremely detailed and has gone through a very careful process, as you might have been able to tell from Councillor Seawood's earlier financial answer. And we are actually laid out here post by post what might be expected and what we are hoping for from this work and this report. And in terms of outcomes, it's difficult to specify outcomes totally in advance when it isn't simply a financial projection, when there's more to it than that. But all of this information is regularly reported to scrutiny, as you will know, Councillor Dixon. But on a regular basis, scrutiny hears about how things are progressing with disabled facilities grants, or what is happening with temporary housing. So there's nothing here which won't be accounted for on a regular basis here within this committee. And I think the last thing I'd like to say is prevention and an integrated structure. There's a lot in here about the necessity to step up our work with prevention and integration. And you will know that these are the two of the key three elements in the county's health and wellbeing strategy. So this is work that is to progress right across Norfolk and to address what we all know are growing inequality problems within our county and within our nation. So I think I'd just like to thank the officers for the paper and be quiet now. Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you. Councillor Penfold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. I'm not quite sure which industry Councillor Cushing worked in before, but just on the ratio of officers to team leaders, I don't think we live in a one-size-fits-all world. So, and when you take office, it's not just about looking at efficiency savings. It's about looking at where services can be improved and where we need to target investment to improve those services in order to better the lives of the residents we represent. And I think excuse me, these recommendations do that. So I'd like to thank the housing team for the work they do in this critical area, and certainly support the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Adams.
Yeah, just to add to that, I suppose, first of all, I mean, besides the burden of dealing with very complex cases, it's also a very highly regulated area of dealing with people. So certainly wrong to compare to, I think, most other industries. We're only seeing demand pressures grow in this area, so we really have to be prepared to adapt. And I think I have to observe that in the present circumstances, we have unprecedented pressures on people and housing services, housing supply. We know also people's energy bills. We certainly have big pressures on housing adaptations. Many of you will have dealt with related cases. So I think all of these changes are the right thing to do, and I hope that residents recognise that the council is trying to address some of these circumstances that exist. And whilst we can't help everyone perhaps as much as they want, those that benefit from these changes will hopefully see immense value in a service that's being provided by the council, and some of that will translate into some life-changing improvements. I'd also like to observe that I think we're seeing the staff and portfolio holder make some really positive impacts and changes to the services, and as we hope to move towards post-COVID world eventually, I've been really grateful to spend time with some of those staff, on an operational level as well, outside of the council responsibilities, and witness some tremendous dedication to the people in North Norfolk. I personally like to see us track the progress of this in future, and whilst there will be data, I think it would be good to see some more qualitative information and examples shared, so that we as councillors sort of understand a bit more about why these services are so valuable, and see some sort of real world examples. Second, that was the first point, rough sleeping coordinator position obviously was subject to some government funding previously. It's existed for some time in the council, and I've certainly seen the value of that in my own ward, which I think, like 2 or 3 others, is a sort of a bit of a magnet towards that sort of activity. I just wondered if we could potentially expect further rounds of government funding to become available there, or perhaps we could, elaborate whether that, on how that post might be replaced in other ways. Thank you.
So government funding is announced on a kind of an annual basis, sometimes more frequently. Lisa probably will be able to answer in more detail, but I think unfortunately the uncertainty from one year to the next means that that type of post has been funded on an annual fixed term basis. That post currently runs to the end of March 22, and we're expecting to have some discussions with the new ministry fairly soon on whether that funding will continue. That funding didn't form part of this report, so there are some posts within Lisa's team in particular dealing with rough sleeping that aren't funded beyond March 2022. I think what we need to look at in terms of as we implement the restructure is whether some of those people, the post holders, decide to look at opportunities within the structure that we've proposed. It may well be that we still continue with some of that work if the government doesn't continue to fund that work stream specifically, but it won't necessarily be in a designated role specifically for that purpose. I think if you look at rough sleeping, it is an issue where it is small in number but high impact for both the person and the communities where people are rough sleeping. It can be quite distressing for people to see rough sleepers and not know what they can do to help. But I think this restructure focuses on the wider issue of homelessness and prevention, and how we can assist more generally. We will not lose sight of rough sleeping. We hope that the government will continue to fund. It is one of their priority areas. They haven't tended to make funding available for wider prevention and homelessness more generally, and that's why we have focused this restructure on those elements, because we know that government still at this moment in time, it is a priority for them. We are still receiving some funding. We are hopeful, that's all we can be, hopeful that we will continue to receive their funding at least for the next financial year, and hopefully possibly further. We do still have some issues with some people that are really do not want to come in off the streets no matter what we do. So I don't know if Lisa wants to add anything more.
Thank you. Yes, so we still have 3 rough sleepers entrenched in our district at the moment, and the rough sleeper coordinator is continually working with those 3 to try and encourage them to come in, but they still persist on sleeping outside on the streets and off-grid potentially in some cases. We had a recent letter this week that's come in, and they're looking at the portfolio champion to champion 5 rough sleepers on a permanent basis. So we'll be speaking to Councillor Fredericks in relation to that as well. We have had meetings with our advisor last week, and the RSI funding year 5 is hopeful, but it's gone back to the current minister at the moment for housing. He's wanting to look over this before he rubber stamps it to send it out, but we're hopeful that the RSI funding will come in. We'll place a bid for that, potentially for the rough sleep post again, and there's tenancy sustainment for those that have historical rough sleeping where we've secured tenancies, and the complex health worker. We're also looking at an early intervention officer as well coming in through that funding. We've got one at the moment which we're trialling. So hopefully that funding will come in for at least 3 years. So that's what they're talking about at the moment. But there is a strong message coming from government that they want to end rough sleeping within this manifesto. So we've got 2 years in which to try and resolve this. Okay, thank you.
Officer Hens, you wish to contribute to this particular point?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. Just to say that the person who is in that rough sleeper role at the moment, not that they're rough sleeping, you understand, is on the secondment. So there is a substantive post for that person to go back into. What we would look at doing in terms of if there wasn't further funding from government, we would look at how we change that role for actually that substantive post in order to continue to provide the valuable work that that individual does. So I think, within that, I can give some reassurance that if there isn't further funding, the post won't just, or the work that that person does won't just vanish. So yeah, I think it's important just to recognise that.
But that would be a matter for getting on for 2 years' time.
It would be when that post was coming up for finish, which is March 22. So it's not.
Oh, right. Okay.
Not very far off at all.
Right. Okay.
All the posts currently are until March 22, which is when RSI year 4 funding ends. So we're hopeful we'll get the bidding round in for RSI 5. But as I say, it's with the minister at the moment to make those decisions. Until he does that through his spending review, we don't know if there'll be an RSI 5 or not.
And Chair, just can I comment on that? I think one of the key issues that we have there is what Lisa has just said. So often we have to bid for funding. It doesn't just arrive at us, we have to ask for it. That, in terms of that level of strategic work, in terms of looking at what's available and finding that funding and going out and getting it, is a key element of what these, this post or these posts do in terms of releasing that capacity that Lisa has in terms of her time. We have grown that service because government has asked us to, in terms of the rough sleeper initiative, the other burdens that have been placed upon us. And I think in terms of that team, they've done a fantastic job of absorbing a lot of that work, because it isn't just as simple as going out when you get some funding and going, let's recruit someone straight away, because that person needs training, that person. Sometimes you just have to get on with doing the work. I think where we're at in terms of this structure is that we've reached that point where we can't ask people to work, beyond 37 hours all the time as staff members and, into the weekends, etc. because it just doesn't work like that. That's not how we can continue to treat our staff. And I think from our point of view, this is about giving us that 2-year space to develop the efficiency, the effectiveness within that service that delivers what I think all of councillors would want around both this table and across the council, in terms of a service that means that we are preventing people from entering that crisis position. And when they do, that instead of having to go to if they become homeless, instead of having to go through a disruptive process, that we're able to manage that and meet the local needs or their needs locally. And I think needs have become far more complex than they were before in terms of those people. It wasn't just about saying, here's a temporary accommodation unit, because some of those people will go into temporary accommodation and come straight out again because it's not. So it's about a whole support package. I think, I'd want members to understand that the situation, and I think in terms of dealing with these people who are at that point, as Councillor Gay said, in extremis, it is about meeting all of those needs, not just providing a service of one size fits all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Adam, do you contend with those replies? Councillor Withington.
Thank you. I do actually think we're probably at quite a momentous time for this council, and this report and what we're trying to do is the point where we make an enormous difference to our residents. We've heard about prevention and early intervention all the way through this, and for me, this is what this is about. We cannot see ourselves as a district council in isolation. What we do here impacts further in through health and social care, through GPs, through Norfolk County Council, through adult social care. We can't see ourselves as separate from that. We work with those people as part of these complex cases. We need to be working in partnership as well within our building. And for me, the crux of this is that we can give the time and the capacity for those leaders to build those relationships and know what the fellow services can do. And we don't be then duplicating things. We're not replicating. We're actually providing a service which is streamlined and more efficient, but actually includes social benefit. And I think that's what Officer Hems was really referring to there. And in terms of going forward, we've already had a 30% increase in referrals to the social prescribing systems in the last 12 months in comparison. We're going to have a much greater demand, and I think we need to do everything we possibly can to make the partnerships work more effectively together. And our leaders and our team leaders, etc., need to have that time to build those partnerships. And for me, that's what the crux of this is all about. By building partnerships, we bring social benefit. And if we get financial benefit as an additional, then that's even more amazing. But to improve the lives of our things is brilliant. And I'm seeing it working with the Domestic Abuse Forum already. Through the similar approach, we're working with several different agencies now, and people are already saying, well, we can do this part, we can't do that part, but you can do this part. And then, it's a much better service and it's actually more efficient. So, I really welcome this, and, I'm actually relieved to see that for once we've got some joined up thinking. And
okay, thank you for that. And finally, Councillor Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. I would firstly observe that we don't benefit the people of North Norfolk, particularly the most disadvantaged, by simply sitting on money. If there's money for housing, it has to be spent in that area. It is the most complex issue that I think we as a council face. We have an increasing number of people who are facing difficulties with housing, whether it be because of private landlords selling up or switching to holiday lets. We have an increasing number of people with mental health issues. There's an increase in domestic violence. Our housing officers will have to deal with that, and people with substance abuse and other serious issues, potentially suicidal people. To do that, we need a team that is properly structured. And a huge amount of work has gone into reviewing the situation to get a structure that, best as we can ascertain, we don't know till it's field tested with any management restructure, that will meet those needs and enable us to much better provide services to the most desperate in our society. I commend the motions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are we all done then? I think we've given this topic a good airing, and we've teased out quite a number of very useful points. So the recommendation is that Cabinet agree the use of uncommitted fee income and reserves to fund the proposed additional posts within the for the revised people services service grouping, and to earmark uncommitted fee income and the required level of reserves to support the funding of the structure for the next 2 years. Do I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Blaithwaite and Councillor Brown. Have a show of hands then to support. Support. I think that's unanimous bar one. Is that correct, Councillor Cushing? Are you abstaining or against? Thank you. Right. Can we move on then to item 11, which is the use of housing reserves to enhance delivery? I think in many ways there are several links that links these two together. And they are part of a much bigger issue. So, Councillor Seawood.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I seem to have quite a lot on the agenda this morning. Right, you've got Nikki Debbish with us this morning, who can certainly deal with some of the detail in this report. Just to, I suppose, to set the context, first of all, towards the end of his premiership, David Cameron used the word that the housing market was broken. There is nothing that this district council can do to actually address that strategic and significant and overriding issue. What we can do with the funds available to us is to try and plug some of the gaps. And this is what this paper is about. Now, the first thing is that it doesn't refer to Section 106 monies that we get for affordable housing. Currently, we've got somewhere between 2.3 and 2.4 million pounds to spend, and a further report will be coming to Cabinet in the reasonably near future about proposals to spend that money. So it's about what we've got remaining in reserves. Now, one of them items of expenditure is the energy officer proposal. And I think it's interesting to note that District Council in Norfolk, which has an energy officer or an energy, has in fact in the last 12 months or the period they've been there, approved 50 projects for energy saving, and they've got 7 pending applications. This count, and that is a Conservative run district council. This council with no officer has only actually approved 3 or 4 and has 12 pending applications. So I think very graphically that actually shows, if you have an officer in post, what can be done. 50 approved projects against 3 or 4. The second thing is the other options for the use of the reserves. Well, some of it will be spent on providing further temporary housing, part of which is for a larger accommodation unit. The council is engaged in a programme to increase its stock of temporary housing for 2 reasons. First of all, it saves money because we're not having to provide additional funding for bed and breakfast accommodation. And secondly, it's a better way of supporting people in difficult housing situations. We keep families together in a housing unit. So that's one of the proposals. Second proposal is to have a rent guarantee scheme so that where people are struggling to find private rented accommodation because they can't provide a guarantee that they will, should there be any shortcomings in their ability to pay the rent, that in fact we can provide that guarantee and therefore remove that blockage to access to housing. And the last one is the shared ownership, which is conversion to affordable rent. One of the things that has emerged is that some of the shared ownership schemes which are in existence in the district, people are struggling to actually engage with that. And it would be better off if in fact those units became social housing. So what this modest scheme does is to actually provide some funding to enable that to happen. We are probably talking about helping something like 10 to 12 families to do that. To me, if we can help 10 to 12 people to access housing and get decent housing and provide housing relief to them, that is a job well done. So that is what is embraced in these three main things for the use of this money. Nikki Devich is present, and I'm sure if I've missed anything or she wishes to embellish anything or add to what I've said, Nikki will do so, and I'm sure she will be in a position to answer members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seward. Can I just pick up before I open it for general questions? Can I just pick up on what I see as a particular issue, and it relates, I think, to the second and third recommendations, and that is the contribution that the private rented sector makes to our overall housing supply and meeting the housing needs. And if you've had a chance to look at my questions and the responses given before the meeting, you'll see that there is particular mention there with regard to the private housing sector. And of course, the paper recognises that there is a significant migration of properties from the private rent sector into either second homes or into holiday lets. And I guess really my point is around, do we understand here strategically what really is happening in the private rented sector? And are we in a position to take more action with regard to prevention of that than to treat, if you like, the symptoms of it? Having acknowledged that the private rented sector is, if you like, diminishing, and I don't know whether the evidence is there, and I don't think the answers given is clear about the extent of evidence of that migration. Is that migration going to second homes? Is that migration going to holiday lets? Or is it simply that private landlords are opting out of the sector for whatever reason? And for me, understanding that is a key step in deciding whether prevention, whether we are addressing the prevention side of that. So just to give you an example, for as long as we have the private rented sector diminishing significantly, then we have got a rising problem. We can to some extent mitigate that by supplying a greater supply of affordables, but we know we're up against it in any event in supply of affordables. So I guess my question really to you, Councillor Seward, is strategically, are you comfortable that we understand what's going on in the private rented sector, and whether or not there's more that we could do in terms of preventive measures in working with the private sector, or developing, and I see there is a mention here of options for a housing company. So I'm looking here at perhaps whether or not we've got that good understanding of the drivers, the dynamics behind this. I'm not challenging what's in the paper per se. I'm challenging, if you like, what I don't see in the paper.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask Dickie Debbage to address some of your some of that. What I will say is this: I think what we're seeing with the private rented sector and what is happening is partly factual, it's partly anecdotal. It's something which has emerged out of the COVID pandemic, not totally, and there is. And as it develops, we will get greater understanding of what it is. And there are further things that the council's able to do to try and arrest that decline, because as you rightly say, if that market starts to decrease, it puts more pressure on affordable and social housing. Then that is something that we've got to try and do. So that, I think, is sort of my overall position at the moment. But Nikki, would you like to come in now and try and help us?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Seaward. I think the points that are being made are very valid. The private rented sector is an important gap filler between those people who can afford to buy and those people who are in dire enough housing circumstances to be able to access affordable housing. It's that kind of middle bridge. The reality is it is a very small sector comparatively in North Norfolk to other parts of the country. And I suspect there are probably two reasons behind that. One is house prices and the prevalence of second and holiday homes and what impact they have on house prices. They are basically soaking up the properties that would otherwise in other parts of the country, I think, become private rented. The other is around demographics. Private renting is not generally the tenure of the retirees, which is what a large chunk of property ownership, property transactions in this district are. However, you're right to say that it's still an important part, and our understanding of it is key. And I think that's reflected when you look in the housing strategy of the importance put on the private rented sector, how we can work better with the landlords that remain, how we can provide support and intelligence to them to help them remain in the sector. I suppose brutally what I would say, though, is the largest dictator of what happens with the private rented sector is money. And the reality is currently it is much easier for somebody to convert their property from long-term lets to holiday lets and make a great deal more money, or if they're not interested in that, to put their house on the market at the moment and make a great deal more money. And that's the reason for people leaving the sector. And as much support and intelligence and help that we can provide, I don't think that we can fight against that economic tide. There potentially is a role for the council, and it is something that we will be examining as to whether establishing a private rented housing company may be an option. It clearly isn't going to solve the problem, but it could be potentially setting an exemplar of the type of private rented housing that might be available. But I think we also work with something called the Eastern Landlords Association, who provide support, and I think we need to strengthen our relationship with them. As far as the stats are concerned, it is very difficult to tell. We can see clearly that the number of holiday and second homes has continued to increase. What we can't necessarily tell is where that's coming from. Is it from private rented sector, or is it from owner occupation? Anecdotally, the evidence is that it's coming from private sector tenancies ending. That continues to be the main reason for households presenting as homeless, that their private sector tenancy has ended and they cannot access another one. Hence, some of the things in this report, like the rent guarantee scheme, to try and help some households who would otherwise struggle into private rented. We await the information from the census to see whether the number of private rented in the district has gone down as we anticipate that it has.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I've asked a lot of questions, and I think others, including you, Officer Demmage, have proposed questions. It doesn't seem to be that many answers, though. And just to continue this one step further, in terms of understanding the private rented sector, you know, do we know who they are, how many they are, where they are, and what kind of communications have we got through them to actually understand more about what we might be able to do in terms of encouraging not only those that are in that sector to stay, but maybe others to come in and be a part of that important gap filling housing supply, as you say. So how much of that information do we have?
We have some of that information, and the honest answer is that most of them are single property landlords, amateur landlords, if you like. There are very few large landlords with multiple properties. Those that we are aware of with multiple properties tend to be those that we have problems with, where we're dealing with enforcement action on the conditions. But in general, we are talking small portfolio landlords, typically one, maybe two properties. Sometimes accidental landlords, people who've ended up with a property through inheritance or whatever, hence our approach around providing better support and information and links to the Eastern Landlords Association, who can help provide that support. But obviously those people who don't see this as a main career or business are those that are more likely to be affected by the possibility of converting to a holiday let or selling a property and removing a headache and receiving some money. So that's one of our major challenges. In reality, the focus of our action with landlords in the past has been around the enforcement side of things. And I think the housing strategy very much recognises that we need to do more work around that support side to help, if not grow this sector, at least try and sustain the sector as much as we can.
That's very helpful. Thank you. There are encouraging words, I have to say, towards the end of that. So we may pick up on those a little later. So I think enough on that. So questions, please. I've got two, Councillor Withington, Councillor Braithwaite and Councillor Brown. Far away.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Nikki. It was most helpful. I think this takes us back, and we said at the beginning this item was so interlinked with the people services issue, and it's very difficult to separate it. But this, I think, is again an example of this change of our ethos towards preventative measures, stopping those families going into crisis. And I think we need to keep hold of that and really focus on that across all areas of the council. You mentioned yourself, Councillor Dixon, that, you know, is there more we can do? Yes, there is more we can do, and I think Nikki was alluding very much to that. Without these roles, we don't have that capacity. I don't feel. I know from my work with officers in the housing team who, you know, again, I can't have enough praise for, that they're spending their time on these complex cases, these building relationships with landlords associations. It takes time, changing the emphasis of rental agents so that they will consider people who are working but are perhaps on universal credit as well. In the last 3 months, I've dealt with 3 domestic abuse cases who all required housing. Very difficult to find anything for them. 3 working couples, long-term rentals, really good people with never missed their rent payments or anything. Return to housing, onto holiday lets, nowhere to go. 2 people with universal credit can't even get a viewing through an agent, you know, and I feel so hard for our housing options teams when they're saying, well, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to go to the private rentals, and they know full well that nobody will even consider them for a property. So we need to be building those relationships. We need to be working with the landlords associations. You know, I've been doing that, trailing around agents, begging them to let them see somebody, going up to offices on developments where there's lots of them and saying, you know, it's not right that you won't see that person. Please let them, you know, let them show you that they're a good tenant. So the rent guarantee, I'm so pleased to see that there, because it makes such a difference. It gives them you know, a weapon that they can go in and say, look, we'll give you 6 months rent in advance. You could take on someone else with a, you know, a good salary, and you're not guaranteed 6 months rent. So, you know, there's some really good things in here. I mean, I'd like to see us go further and say we should be lobbying for changes to the rent being paid direct to landlords again, not unless you're just in large arrears. So for me, that's is brilliant, and I really support it from that sense. And I hope that we would use this opportunity to build that private rental sector and change that emphasis, that it's not acceptable for people who, just because you are on a lower income or you've had some bad luck, that you can't get a home. I would like to say something about the energy officer, but I'll leave that till later and let other people refer on this bit. So, I wholeheartedly support this.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, I was just going to say anecdotal evidence. If we wait for hard and fast evidence before acting, we will not be proactive, we will be reactive, and we need to get ahead of the trend. But I would ask Officer Debbage, do we have any anecdotal evidence of commercial properties, shops, high street shops, specifically offices, being turned into accommodation? And would that accommodation be going towards the private rental sector, or would that be looking again at the curse of the Airbnb?
In answer to that, we don't have any knowledge of permitted development. I think you're talking about where commercial is turned into residential. I know that it's happening in other parts of the country at scale. We have been looking at initiatives, particularly, for example, linked with their Heritage Action Zone in North Walsham, about can we try and work with some of the commercial premises in the town to bring into use some of the spaces above the shops. So there are avenues that we're exploring. Again, what would that be used for? We would work with landlords to try and, or owners to try and ensure that it is used for longer term lets, but the cash incentive of shorter term lets is always there as a tantalizing prize, I'm afraid. But that there are some opportunities. They're not easy ones, the commercial premises, but it's definitely worth pursuing.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to thank Nicky Debbage and Graham Connolly for an excellent report, extremely well presented. I just want to pick up on comments made by Councillor Seward earlier. It's not often I agree with former Prime Minister, Mr. Cameron, but I do on this particular occasion. The housing market, housing sector is pretty much a broken system, and there is a definite connection between the previous agenda and this agenda in terms of the main driver, the main contributor to the need for temporary accommodation is a failure, and this is where I disagree with Mr. Cameron, on previous governments and the current government to address the lack of security for private sector tenants and the failure to look at how notices to quit under Section 21 operate. Just for the benefit of members, that's the section in the Housing Act that enables a landlord on a whim to give notice to quit to existing tenants for various reasons. He may want to let the property instead to holidaymakers, as we've heard. He may want to take advantage of the misfiring stamp duty holiday, which has inflated house prices, in our area, and sell the property. This is a long overdue review of a problem which has existed for a long time. And it's the failure of our government, I'm sorry to say, to look at this and to see how private sector tenants can be offered greater security. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say I'm more sympathetic to the proposals in here. Just an observation, if we want to get a an insight into the local housing market. I wonder whether there's any worth talking to the local estate agents. I realise that won't necessarily be definitive, but they're obviously the people who have their finger on the pulse of what's happening in the housing market. So we might get some useful feedback on what's happening in the private rented sector there, on the assumption that many private landlords will use an estate agent in order to let their houses in terms of doing that. I take on board what Councillor Seawood said about the energy proposal officer, and I think the comparison with another district is actually interesting. I was wondering how that would work, but I can sort of see the value in terms of going down there. And I would actually say one thing I do actually strongly support is the shared ownership and the conversion to affordable rent. I can probably appreciate that might be difficult for a number of people, so that to me actually makes sound sense to actually move in that direction. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Spagnola.
I was just going to give an example. My ex-husband has just recently had to move into rental accommodation. He's on minimum wage. The only job that he can get locally is care work, which is notoriously minimum wage job. He's had to move 10 miles away from his work, which means he now has to pay for a train to get to work. So it's kind of going against the system. He can't now afford to live closer to his work because he's on minimum wage, and landlords aren't over keen on looking at that either. He can't get viewings as well. And at the current with no private rentals, there's such a long list of people who want to get on there. There's no chance. There's absolutely no chance. So I think it's a bigger problem than what we're looking at just generally at housing. It's also work-based. Again, like other people have said, it's social based. There's things like that comes into it with childcare as well. If you've got to live somewhere else and you've got a mum who used to look after your children, that's also going to impact on that as well. So I just think it's a lot bigger issue than just what we're looking at here, and I wholeheartedly support this.
Okay, thank you. Are we all done in? Sorry, I didn't see you to my left. Councillor Rest.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the time to let me speak. First of all, I apologise if I'm going to repeat anything that may have been in your email that you sent everybody, but I didn't get a copy, so I can't refer to what is in there. I just have two very small comments. One regards the rent guarantee. I just wondered, is this classed as an income to these people that we guarantee this and pay the extra? And if so, would it affect any benefits that these people are on? And I know sometimes it's a very thin balance, and I'm sure somebody else has got the answer to that. My other question, and I'm sorry if it's going to be a little bit controversial, but shared ownership to affordable rent to me is the wrong way round. I don't agree with that at all. I think affordable rents need to be shared ownerships. People need to start taking more responsibility for the properties that they're going to live in. Even if they only pay a very small amount, it is a foot on that ladder and it gets them going. I think what we're doing is the wrong way around. Thank you.
Okay, they sound like fairly technical questions to me. Officer Devitt?
I can respond to those. In terms of does this count as income? No, the rent guarantee is simply, as it suggests, it's a guarantee should there be a problem with payments. So we aren't actually handing over any money unless there is an issue. We are there as the guarantor for somebody who may not have access to somebody who can necessarily provide them with a guarantee for the rent payment. So there's no impact on benefits for that. As far as shared ownership to affordable rent, again, difficult one this, because we do recognise the value of shared ownership for some households, but it's clearly not an option for others. It could be an option for more, we believe, than take it up. And one of, again, reflecting back on the housing strategy, one of the priorities in the strategy is to try and raise awareness and understanding of shared ownership. It is going to be a part of the future provision of housing. It's something that the government support, and so a lot of the grant money for housing associations goes towards providing shared ownership homes. So we need to be able to make better use of them, to exploit them for families who really could benefit from them. But equally, we know in the current year's programme, we have a large number of shared ownership properties coming through for various reasons. So we think that converting a small number of them to affordable rent that do do work better for those households on lower incomes or uncertain future incomes means that 8 of those properties are going to be able to meet a higher need than they would otherwise. So I think it is a balance.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other, or are we all done? Councillor Seawood.
Yeah, just coming back, Dickie Debbie did refer to the Heritage Action Zone in North Walsham and whether or not commercial properties were being developed into residential units. Yes, some of them are. It's already started. And indeed, one of the developers that's involved in it is very supportive of the HAS project. So it is actually starting and it actually makes sense. The issue, of course, is whether how well it's going to meet local housing need, but it has started. And I also think that Councillor Cushing's suggestion that it'd be useful to talk to local estate agents, particularly those involved in private lettings, I think would be helpful, because that will be another piece of market intelligence to try and help us determine what's the best way forward with private rented lettings.
Thank you. Well, just to try and wrap this up, we've got the 3 recommendations there, but I'm sensing a 4th recommendation, it I think picks up on a number of comments that I heard, and that is that we can do more, or we should be doing more, and perhaps there is scope here to for a recommendation to investigate what more can be done to work with private landlords to retain and promote the supply of private sector housing. Does that sound like something that you would support in terms of adding to or should I say, getting more into the prevention side of the loss of housing and how we might indeed promote the supply of more private sector housing? Any comments on that?
I'd just like to add that that is something that we are actually doing at the moment, albeit to a limited extent. We recognise the need for liaison with landlords, and so a housing options officer was seconded into a post some months ago, and we've used that experience to identify, and so the accommodation and support team leader and the accommodation and support officer, that will be a key element of their role, alongside managing the temporary accommodation that we own, and also looking to ensure that there's a wide range of different options of temporary accommodation. So not just privately renting, not just the accommodation that we own, but things like home share, where we can talk to people who might have a room in their house and they might be willing to let that. So we're going to be using that resource to explore all avenues in terms of what the private rented sector could offer us.
So I think we've kind of heard, and I think one would recognise there are several facets to this, and would you find it helpful, let's put it that way, to reinforce the work that you are saying, that such a recommendation would come from this committee?
I'm happy with the recommendation, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to second that, I'm happy with that. I think it does echo a lot of the themes that came out of the housing strategy, and perhaps it might be helpful if I could pick those out and forward them on to Scrutiny, so you can see how many of the housing strategy actions do refer to the private rented sector and how we can support it better.
Thank you for that, Officer David. Yes.
I would just like to say I would support that, especially if we can work more closely with commercial landlords, turning their properties into accommodation that can be useful to us in supporting families. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Withington?
Would you mind if I just heard your wording again, please?
Would you like me to read it out?
Yes, please.
I will. Yes, it's to investigate what more can be done to work with private landlords to retain and promote the supply of private sector housing. I think that that's fairly generic in the terms of it's not aiming at a particular issue. It's looking at the broad issue based around private sector housing, how we might retain, because that's a key issue, and how we might promote it, because that's how we might be able to use that as a gap filler for the future.
Yes, I agree.
Good.
However, sorry, could we consider somehow, and someone who's good with words might be able to say this quickly, making sure that that comes within those roles, because I think we've already specified within this very much so that that's the roles of the accommodation support officers, those lead capacities. I think it needs to show that there is a structure in place for that to happen, and really this is about us coming back and checking in a way that it is going to happen.
I wouldn't disagree with what you're saying. I would just simply say that perhaps for this level, this committee, if we keep it generic, that gives maximum flexibility to do whatever is necessary, because the key aims of this are in that recommendation. And I always stop short of going too far down the specifics of how it should be done or how it should be linked. What we're after here is outcomes, aren't we? And I think that investigative work is best done, well, will be done at officer level, and it is for officers to decide how best that can be done. What we're after from them is an improvement in the current situation. And at some point in the future, we will be returning to this topic and saying to officers, so where are we now? Would that be? Okay, could I have a proposer and seconder then for that additional recommendation? Got Councillor Brathwaite, Councillor Brown. Right, can I have a vote then, a show of hands on that particular additional recommendation? That looks to me like unanimous. And could I have then a proposer then for all four recommendations? Councillor Spagnola, Councillor Brown, and could I have a show of hands in support of, please? Again, that looks like unanimous to me. Thank you very much. Right, I'm conscious that it's 11 o'clock just gone, and that this meeting is likely to be rather longer than our usual ones, I think. So would you be comfortable if we take item 12 and then have a break? Thank you very much indeed for coming. Right, okay, over then to item 12, determination of council tax discounts. Councillor Seawood again.
This is an annual routine report, as I'm sure you're aware, Chairman. There is only a slight amendment this year. It relates to extending the scheme to a small number of potential residents that have hardship cases. Numbers are probably no more than a handful, and that's the only change. But Lucy Hume is here today if members have any particular questions.
Officer Hume.
Thank you. Yes, just one minor change this year around the introduction of the hardship relief. So this was recommended to me by our revenues team, who felt that particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, where people had approached us with difficulties paying their council tax bill, we had nothing in our regulations that allowed us to grant write-offs or relief to those people until we'd been through the court process and the recovery process, which is obviously incredibly stressful for individuals. We want to put this new relief in to allow us discretion to write off people's council tax liability in those situations without having to go through that recovery process. During the pandemic, we think this would have applied to 2, possibly 3 cases. So we don't think that this is going to be a huge financial burden to the council, even though we have to pay our share and the share of the county council and the other preceptors as well. But it does make a huge difference to those particular individuals that it would affect. So this is why we're recommending this to you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this item? No? Okay, can I have a proposer and a seconder then that we accept the multiple recommendations grouped together under two main headings, or two, recommendation 1 and 1 runs through to A, B, C through to G, and 2 runs from A and B. Are you happy to propose and second en bloc? I've got Councillor Withington, Councillor Heinrich, and could I have a show of hands then, please, to accept those recommendations? Okay, that looks unanimous to me. Thank you very much indeed. Right, okay. It's just gone 5 past. Shall we have a 10-minute break, comfort break, and resume at 17 minutes past? Right, are we able to I'm conscious that we are past the point when we were to reconvene, so we can do that. Are we back? Thank you. Right, so we have dealt with item 12. I am conscious that Officer Hems needs to leave us around 12 o'clock, and I don't know what our progress will be up to item 15, but my proposal is to deal with 15 next to allow Officer Hems to leave. Anybody object to that? No? Okay, then we will move to item 15 then, and over to you, Officer Hems.
Chair, would it be preferable if I move to the front so people aren't craning their neck?
Move to wherever you need to. Preferably not through the exit.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm conscious that I was sitting behind many people. So this is an update for overview and scrutiny. We bring them periodically. I think on the last occasion that this was brought, there was particular interest around the progression through Parliament of well, what was then the resources and waste strategy paper that government had set out there, ambitions over improving a number of areas in relation to the environment. That has now translated into the Environment Bill. It's currently on its third reading in the House of Lords, so the next stage effectively is royal assent. And I think in terms of the likely changes that are there will be no further changes, I think, in terms of the intention of what will be enacted in due course. So the relevant parts, it's quite wide-reaching in terms of the Environment Bill, so it covers the government's aspirations about targets, plans and policies for the natural environment. It deals with a new regulator, effectively, the Office for Environmental Protection, but also quite wide-ranging issues within the waste and resource area. So it's looking at talking more about resource and less about waste. And that really is about trying to see some of the product that we have currently that is considered waste more in that circular economy, in terms of looking at it as a resource opportunity, so that really pushing home that issue around reuse and recycling, etc. There are a number of elements within that. So one of, or the important things, I suppose, from the council's point of view, the first is the extended producer responsibility. So effectively at the moment, as a producer of material for consumption, so food packaging, for anything that you are producing as part of your product, there are targets about the amount that you have to have that is recyclable. You have to have a degree of cost involved in the ability to reprocess or to deal with that. But this act, it takes the Environment Act, when it becomes that, will take that a lot further. And so it will stipulate some of the issues around how much recyclable content there should be within your product. And if you don't meet those, or if you don't have those abilities to show that you demonstrate you're complying, there will be a higher tariff charged to you as a producer. What it should do for local authorities is that that producer responsibility is end to end. So it's from production right the way through to the disposal of the product. So for us as a local authority, in theory, there ought to be more provision made or more funding available around picking up things like the litter and rubbish that would come from the disposal of those packagings and those products, etc. We will see what happens with that. because one of the things about the Environment Act is that it's effectively an enabling act. It enables the regulations to be made that introduce further provision. And so in terms of that, we are still waiting for the detail of those regulations to come forth. I'll also mention the deposit return scheme. For those of you who are old enough like me will remember the old returning the bottles to the shop for your 5p back. And they're looking at that around a range of bottles up to a certain size for both glass and plastic. The detail of it is quite complex because it depends on how you do it. They're talking about, one of the things they're talking about is reverse vending machines. So when you go into a supermarket, effectively, there's also a machine there you can put your plastic bottle and glass bottle into, and it will basically recognize that and credit you an amount. The issue is, does it credit you on a voucher, on an account? Does it produce cash? Because they need to make sure it's not something that's likely to be subject to further abuse and fraud. And I suppose I mention that because when we come a bit further on, it has both of those things have an impact on us as a local authority, because if we are reducing the amount of product, virgin product, and product that is available for recycling by both the extended producer responsibility in that manufacturers will look at reducing the amount of packaging they're producing. It should increase its recyclability. But for instance, we've suffered in terms of our recycling rates through quite a lot of what's called lightweighting. So glass bottles that you go and buy your wine in now are typically 30% less glass content than they used to be, which is brilliant because it means there's less product being used. It's how it should be. But in terms of a local authority and your recycling targets, you're immediately taking out weight, which is what you're judged against in terms of your percentage of your waste being recycled. So from our point of view, in terms of that, it's likely the amount of recyclable waste will reduce because manufacturers will look at reducing the amount they're producing because they'll have to pay for it. And secondly, some of the things like deposit return scheme, often at the moment, one of the valuable commodities within the resale of recyclable material is the polymer that plastic bottles are made out of. And so if it's going into a different waste stream, the ability for the local authority to resell that material, and we do that as part of a Norfolk-wide joint venture company, but the ability to resell that may be reduced in the future. So there potentially is a positive impact on the environment, but there also is potentially a future impact for us as a local authority in terms of the cost of processing will remain, but the potential income may reduce. Most notably, I think, from this legislation, there are a couple of things that members need to be aware of. The first is the intent is that a mandatory requirement will be introduced on the current indications in 2023 for the separate collection of food waste. That will basically be something that we can cope within North Norfolk because the waste procurement undertaking that we took a couple of years ago included as a costed option the separate collection of food waste as a completely and entirely different collection stream. And that means that we provide all households with a waste food caddy, and they would then have that collected on a weekly basis through a small collection vehicle. So yes, in terms of that, we know where we will go with that. We know what the costs will be subject to indexation, etc. So we do understand that. We expect that that will come from new burdens funding from government, as is, and they have said that it will come. They will introduce that. businesses have an enhanced responsibility to separate out their recycling waste. So there will be a need to look at our collection service we offer to trade waste customers, and we'll be looking at how we can meet the needs of our existing customers, but also look at the ability for us to grow that service into other areas that we don't already serve in customers, etc. So I think in terms of in general, we are still waiting for a lot of the detail in terms of the regulation, but we have a little bit more clarity around the dates as when those like to come forward. I think the biggest for it, one of the other issues for us is about the potential for a free garden waste bin for every resident. And we're looking at the details of that, because again, that is something that the local authority currently charges for. And also for us as a rural authority, not everybody has space for a bin, and not everyone wants a garden waste bin because many people produce their own compost, etc. So we'll have to look at what that means for us. And then finally, in terms of some of the powers around enforcement, they are tackling some of those enviro crime issues. So we should have greater enforcement powers to be able to deal with fly tipping and other issues of that ilk, with an increased level of penalty being able to be charged. So hopefully that will give us an ability to do more. And then finally, in this update, I've just touched on the Serco contract. So Chair, as you said to me earlier, it's been a bit of a triple whammy for them recently. So, you know, there have been all the issues to do with COVID, and that has been numerous. Obviously, they've had to have bigger social distancing. They've had to respond in different ways in terms of managing their staff and keeping COVID free. But not just that, it's seen a change in the profile of the waste that they're collecting. So I think with more people working at home, they've seen an increase in both recycling amounts, probably because everybody's having their parcels delivered, etc. But also in terms of some of the tonnage around the residual waste. And our garden waste tonnage has gone up significantly, almost 1.5 times what it would be for month on month for a typical previous years. And it might be that's due to climatic issues in terms of we've had wet and sunny weather throughout the period. But I suspect more people have been at home to garden during the lockdown times and have used that and have resultantly produced more waste. We've also had obviously the issues around the HGV drivers. We've not been too badly affected within North Norfolk, and they have put measures in place to try and recruit and retain drivers, but it has had some impact. And then most recently the fuel issue, and the fuel issue has been exacerbated, I think, by the fact that we have those freighters currently use the same fuel stations that you and I do. So they will use normal service stations, normal garages on a fuel card. That has meant that they've been restricted in terms of some of the amount of fuel that some stations will give them. They've had to queue, they've had to go out and look for fuel at different sites. And whilst they've done a fantastic job of that, the contract requires them to provide a 25,000 litre fuel tank at the depot, which Serco haven't yet done. So I think in terms of service delivery, you're probably, Chair, not seeing massive impacts. We have had some disruption to do with some smaller vehicles. We are seeing them completing collections, particularly around garden waste, because of the tonnages and the amount that they've needed to tip on a Saturday. Generally, we've not seen massive issues in terms of it being a prolonged delay. However, I would draw to the committee's attention that, in effect, there are quite a lot of things that are being delivered effectively, as I describe it, as Kia 2.0. So they're still using the model of delivery that they had under the previous contract. And whilst that works, it's not the contract that we let, and it's not got the bells and whistles, if you like, and the efficiencies and effectiveness that, if I'm putting it bluntly, this authority is paying for. So I think, you know, officers are working hard to try and get to an understanding of when the new target operating model, the new efficiencies, all of the things that they've put in their bid and in their method statements associated with that will be delivered. And I think in terms of that, sorry, someone just rang me. In terms of that, I think it would be something for this committee to consider as to whether they wish to speak to Serco at a future date about what actually they are doing about meeting those obligations within the contract. That is something that Breckland, so this is a three-way contract. It's a single contract across three authorities, ourselves, Breckland and Kings Lynn. Breckland Scrutiny have had Serco in to ask questions about. I have to say, Breckland have probably had some more high-profile issues than North Norfolk have, and Kings Lynn, my understanding is that they will do the same in a similar time frame. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. I think that's covered what the future might hold, and it covers pretty much where we are in terms of the current contract and what we might want to consider. So questions for, I've got Councillor Braithwaite, Councillor Brown and Councillor Penfold. I think actually the other way around. I think I saw your hand first. So it'll be Councillor Penfold, Councillor Braithwaite, and then Councillor Brown, and then can't see everywhere at once. Councillor Adams.
Obviously benefits of being the vice chair, Mr. Chair. No, I'm not saying that. Steve, thanks for that. Two questions. Are you saying that Serco have targets within their contract that they're not hitting, and therefore obviously we would want to talk to them about that? So are there specific targets that are in there they're missing for whatever that might be? And just on a more micro level, I had a lot of residents ask me about brown bins recently and a delay in getting them. So just wondering if are there any issues about us issuing brown bins to residents at the moment? There seems to be a big delay. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of targets, there are elements. Sorry, I'll take a step back. So within the contract, there's a performance management framework. That performance management framework sets out a number of performance standards and also sets out within there performance standard failures. So for instance, Sercos are supposed to pick up every bin on the scheduled day of collection. So if your bin is due on a Monday, they're supposed to collect it on there. In terms of that, if they don't collect it on that day of collection, then they have a rectification period that they can go back, which is 12 o'clock the following day, in effect. At the moment, because of the lack of management reporting they're able to produce, we don't know when they've been and picked it up. So we don't know whether they've rectified that problem in time or whether there ought to be a £50 per bin deduction made against that variable amount. There are things, for instance, the contract requires every member of their staff to have a suitable uniform, which they provide, and to be clearly identifiable via an agreed identity badge, which they haven't provided. So there is and that's a per person, per incident deduction. So there are some things which you could quite adequately say, because of the things that I've outlined in terms of COVID and other things, you'd expect there to be some delay to. But there are other bits like the production of identity badges, which are not the biggest issue in the world, but are in the contract and they're not achieving. And I think, the thing for me that's probably missing, they've been busy concentrating on delivering the core services absolutely right. I think the bit that they haven't had enough eye on is the added value items. So the provision of a bulky waste reuse. At the moment, we offer a bulky waste service. Serco collect it, it's disposed of. Their bid included a reuse service, a two phase. First was a reuse service, so stuff that was suitable for reuse, they would look to segregate and work with a partner to bring back into use. Now, over COVID, they couldn't do that because the charity partner they used had no outlet for that furniture and those bulky items. But they're now back in the system, but we're still not our bulky reuse sorted. And again, these are things we push them on, but I think in terms of that, we need to understand when the added value will be delivered to us. Because ultimately, that's the basis on which we awarded this contract to Serco. We evaluated it quite stringently against set criteria. And from that point of view, we absolutely had to deliver. We have to deliver on that from my perspective. In terms of brown bins, so we had a pause in brown bins last year. That was really about trying to manage the issues around Serco's transition to the new contract and to not put additional demand on the service at a time when they were mobilising and we had additional tonnage coming in and all of those issues. We did reopen the service for new customers. More recently, we've had a pause because there has been, in like so many other sectors, shortage of the polymer that they use to make the brown bins with. So brown bins are made of more virgin polymer than a black or a green bin. And the reason is they generally take more weight and they're more prone to splitting. And so because there's been less virgin polymer available nationally, internationally, there's been a delay on the brown bin production. So we ordered in our normal timescale. The timescale for delivery was much longer. So we had to manage that process by putting a pause on. But I think if we haven't reopened, I think we had a delivery and we managed those that were on the waiting list. I think we've now reopened it generally.
They were on the waiting list and waiting quite a long time. So hopefully that's been, I'll check back through the various residents. Thank you.
Yeah, as we discussed earlier, Serco seems to be having a trouble in collecting rubbish from places harder to reach, the narrow lanes and the alleyways. Can I just say I support fully your suggestion that we should ask Serco to actually represent themselves at this in front of us so we can ask some searching questions. But I'd just like to say that the waste in my ward that has not been collected because it is of a narrow, in difficult to reach areas, has certainly would rack up for the £50 the £50 charge. So how do we make residents alert you to the fact that their bins have not been emptied for the requisite time?
Thank you. Just in terms, so having a rural district, having areas that are quite difficult to access, both rurally and in towns, part of the bid includes smaller vehicles. So a standard refuse freighter that we deploy on this is usually a 26 ton. All of our vehicles are what they call narrow track vehicles. So it just means they're a little less bulky in terms of the wheelbase, etc. So, but we also provide a number of smaller, Serco provide a number of smaller vehicles. Whereas they ordered all of the 26 tonners right at the beginning of the award, they didn't order the others until later. So there was a delay in vehicle delivery because of the pandemic. and effectively our 26 tonners should have come in July. They came in October. We're still waiting for those 18-ton vehicles and the 12-ton and even a 7.5-ton. At the moment, Serco are using either hire fleet or what they describe as previously enjoyed. And previously enjoyed basically means it's a vehicle that's come off a contract that's come to its natural end, i.e. 8 or 9 years. By that stage, the vehicles are effectively, they're done. And so we, at the beginning of the contract, we had some issues with reliability. We have seen some issues on the reliability of those 18 tonners recently and the 12 tonner. It's unfortunate. Normally you'd cope with it, but it's unfortunate that all 3 vehicles went down at the same time. The 18 tonners have been now, there were hire vehicles. The hire company brought Dennis Eagle, the manufacturer, in to sort them, and they have now been sorted. And the 12 tonner is in a position where the repair to that should have been done overnight on Monday. So I hope that will be a temporary issue. We are awaiting the delivery of our brand new fleet, and obviously that should improve reliability. In terms of reporting, and I think the issue is, and perhaps this is a future question, the issue is that residents should expect to have their refuse, recycling, brown bin, whatever, collected on the day on which it's the same day, once a week, whether it be recycling or residual. And the problem, I think, is that residents are now used to their bin not being collected necessarily because of, especially on the garden waste, because there's that much tonnage, they have to go and tip more frequently. It reduces the time to collect. They're struggling with completing the rounds. And the difficulty, I think, for residents is that if your normal thing is it's not being collected, I'll just leave it out. How do you know, without going and lifting all the lids on your neighbours, as to whether your bin has actually been missed individually, or it's down a difficult track and they haven't had a vehicle, or whether you should ring the next day, or whether you should just leave it out and hope? Because there comes a point where if you leave it out and hope and they don't come back for it, and then you ring up, they'll say, no, we can't come back, because that just puts them further behind with the catch up. So we're hoping that the situation in terms of day of collection activity will get better because of some of the steps we're asking them to put in place. But actually following a contact from Councillor Withington, I actually followed through the reporting bit. One of the things it says on there is, please, report this, use this form, have you checked that you're on the right collection day, so it's linked to our bin Canada, and then service updates. And when you click on the service updates, it takes you to something that actually doesn't give you any service update. So we're looking at, it will give you if there's massive disruption. So, snow and ice, we're down for a week, we're not collecting, this is the arrangements, but it doesn't give you at a granular level of day by day. And I think one of the things we could look at doing is whether we can actually get some service updates from them as at the end of the day to say, this road, this is where we're behind. Because I get a spreadsheet each day that says, 6 bins missed or 6 bins on so-and-so road have not been collected. It's a question of whether we can actually connect that through into our system such that it will enable us to pull that service disruption for residents forward. So, yeah.
I'm conscious of the time.
Sorry,
we've got a few more questions to go. So can we make the questions snappy and the responses equally snappy? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm pleased to see this report today. When I first joined this committee, I raised the issue of food recycling, and I'm really pleased to see that the prediction from Steve that the government would cover most of the cost of implementing that seems to be the case several months on. So I'm pleased to see that. In Scotland, they've had bottle recycling and refunds for some time. So it's good to see the government beginning to catch up with the likes of Scotland. I'm not sure about the other nations.
Are we snappy?
Yeah, we're snappy. On the question of breaches of the contract, is there a dispute resolution process within the contract? If so, is it being followed? What stage is it at? Is it your intention to call Serco in? And how soon can they get the 25,000 litre tank installed? Is it because of a shortage of materials, HGV drivers, Brexit or the pandemic that it's not happening?
So in terms of the, well, let's deal with the last one first. The tank is built and available. They've had some issues. They don't own the site. It is a tenanted, they're a tenant of a landlord. There were some issues around installation that have been resolved. But I think if we look behind that, Serco have bid recently for the Bordland contract, and I think if they'd won that, they'd have looked at having a super depot elsewhere. I suspect that the reason it hasn't been installed is because they've not wanted to install it and then move it later. And so they've hedged their bets a bit and then being caught out by a fuel crisis that they hoped wouldn't happen and that they'd just be able to install the tank at a later stage. So I think in terms of the fuel situation, it is somewhat of Serco's making, but there is no delay, and they are now moving that forward. So it should be. I'm pushing on that. In terms of the dispute resolution, yes, there is dispute resolution in the contract, but it is for very significant issues, and we're not at that point. So we're using the informal route at the moment. One of the things the contract says is that it's Serco's responsibility to work out what the performance failure deductions are from the contract each month, and then take that off the monthly variable bill. But on the basis we haven't had any bills and invoices from them since April, whilst we've been resolving the issues around property numbers and things, then we don't know whether they're taking that money off or whether it will be accurate, etc. So at this stage, we would look to, there is a letter in my inbox about to wing its way to the last year's performance management deductions. So yeah, we will be using that mechanism in order to encourage them to improve in a number of areas.
Right, thank you. That's Adam.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just feel it'd be remiss of me not to mention both the Barrowland and the green space side of the Serco contract. We've seen overwhelmingly good feedback in Cromer, posts on social media pages, getting literally thousands of interactions, praising the work of Serco operatives like Colin, who works in Cromer. But I certainly do have some concerns surrounding the domestic and street collections. So certainly welcome that opportunity to have a further discussion with Serco. Two sort of questions or points for you, Steve. I just wondered if you sort of had any concerns about the sufficiency of New Burden's funding for food waste collection, what that might look like. And two, we've mentioned the issues with HGV drivers, but these are a longer term issue, and the government sort of walked into this crisis and it was going to have some long term impact. So have Serco demonstrated to you and to ourselves that they have a longer term plan? Thank you.
So in terms of longer term plan, yes. So they have an internal recruitment process. So they have a training scheme inside for loaders who want to train up to become drivers. They've used that before. North Norfolk have got, I think, 4 on that scheme. The difficulty with it is the availability of the training and the testing for it as well. But yes, they've got plans in place. So the bits that are affecting that are out with of their control. In terms of the sort of short-term solution, they have put in place measures to try and attract new drivers. We've promoted some of their material in terms of encouraging people who might want to work within that sector to do so. So yeah, I think it's a it's a national issue. It goes much wider than that, and that shortage is not going to be resolved as it stands at the moment I think we're in reasonably good stead within that, but who knows what will happen. Sorry, Councillor Adams, can you just repeat your first part? It was.
Yeah, sure. We've been talking about the likelihood we see food waste collections in North
sorry.
Norfolk. And I'm just, there's an obvious pressure here. It's a wide geographical area, rurality, and there's going to be costs there, I think, for the council, rather than, a sort of revenue opportunity on the back of, I don't know, like with the glass collections, where there's a sort of, a portion of money that essentially the authority retains, isn't there?
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll get anything like that or how it will work financially.
No, is the honest answer. Snappy.
That's good. That's the best answer you've made this morning.
No, and the reason I say no is because we don't know what the regulations will say or what the new burdens funding is. All I can tell you is we do know what the cost of the service will be at that future point. So no, I can't give you any further information at the moment on that.
Good, thank you. Councillor Gay, equally snappy question, I'm sure.
Perhaps not, Chairman.
Oh, come on.
But thank you so much. I'm grateful for being allowed to speak. I just want to say I have no criticism of the men who empty my bins. I've had a successful bulky waste collection, but I do remember when we were discussing this contract that the reuse and some of those concessions within the contract were very persuasive to us, and I think we must insist on having them. But I'd like to just say something a bit more philosophical, Chairman. I think it's a shame that there's so much food being wasted in this country that we have a national service for food collection. And I just think also, if you're going to give away bins, composting bins would be more useful than brown bins, which have another purpose and so on. And this council has had in the past a policy of giving away compost bins, and it was quite successful in terms of persuading people to switch their practices. So my question, Chairman, is to Steve, do you foresee a time when, instead of trucking waste around the country and indeed around the world, we actually have a policy of waste minimization? Because, when I monitor my own stuff, it's mostly wrappings of various kinds. And I can't believe that I'm unique in this. And other, there should be requirements to start reducing the amount of stuff around manufactured goods and things that are sent to us. The tide of bubble wrap. Anyway, do you foresee a time when this might be addressed?
I think we are at the beginning of that position now, and I think the government policy in terms of this legislation is designed to try and force some of that on to people. I suspect that things won't fundamentally change until we as consumers start to demand it and start to behave in ways that promote it. I think we live in a disposable society very much, and I think we're all guilty of that to a degree. I recycle my milk bottles, but not so very long ago, my parents had their milk delivered each day in bottles that were then taken off for reuse and rewashing, and milk came back in them a few days later. I think there are ups and downs to all of those elements, but I suspect with government pressure coming on to business in terms of hitting them in the pocket if they're not producing packaging or reducing the packaging or making it recyclable, that will impact. But I suspect nothing fundamentally will change until, as a society, we start to say, no, we don't want it like that. I don't want my stuff arriving in a plastic bag. I'd like it in a paper bag, or wrapped in a different way.
Right, okay. Thank you. Right, so we're asked to, I think, receive and note the report. And I'm detecting that we would like Serco to come and visit us and give us the opportunity of asking a few pertinent questions. Is that the case? Do I see nods of approval? I think I see hands sufficient to say that we will note and we will take that as an action to put on the work programme. And I'm sure you'll extend an invitation in due course.
I will indeed. Once we've sorted out the map of suitable date, we'll get them along.
Splendid. Okay, thank you very much indeed. And you can get away in time.
And thank you for moving the agenda around for me.
Right, okay, returning back to where we were. The next item on our agenda is number 13, which is Beach Huts and Chalets Annual Monitoring Report, pages 101 to 108. And that is Councillor Seawood.
Thank you very much, Chairman. We've got Renata Garfoot with us this morning to add detail and to help in answering members' questions. This report came out of a task and finish group which was set up in 2018 to look at beach chalets and huts. So that's why this is before the Scrutiny Committee today. I can provide you with an update on chalet refurbishment in Sheringham and Cromer. I've received an email this morning from Russell Tanner, the Property Services Manager, saying that the likely start is the first week in November, and given the vagrancies of winter weather, the period for completing these refurbishments is extended to March. So it is getting started. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, certainly welcome the maintenance programme. I think my biggest anxiety here is around the way the service recharges are presented, and we know they don't all relate to the services which are relevant to beach huts and chalets. So I've got certainly absolutely no problem with revenue from assets like these paying for services that the council deliver, but I feel the way that it is potentially presented does not favour the business case for keeping these assets. So, you know, Cromer is certainly a net contributor. It delivers the largest amount of service charges that, you know, certainly more than I think is spent in Cromer, and it contributes to the whole district. And that's despite, I think, the belief of many councillors, in fact. So you can understand my anxiety here about, you know, looking at those figures. It looks as if essentially we're sort of almost making, or coming close to not really having a viable service. So I think the way that is presented could perhaps be considered in future, if that's something we could discuss.
I was just going to say Renata might respond to that. She's available.
Sorry, we've got, oh yes, beg your pardon, we've got Renata on screen. Renata.
Thank you. The recharges are all the costs to do with running council services. So they are spread across all the budgets that the council has. And as mentioned, some of those will directly relate to that service. So there will be around the staff that need to produce the invoicing and deal with the accountancy of the beach huts, HR support. But then there are other services that don't perhaps sort of generate an income, so like internal audit, and so those services and costs then are included in all of the council's budgets. So it does distort the figures slightly, but that's the sort of the practice that the council has in dealing with its recharging. So sorry, and just to add, we're working through a zero-based budget at the moment. So we're reviewing all of the recharges, and that figure then might change because it gives us an opportunity then to review those. But I think those recharges will always appear to be quite high. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Williams.
Okay, there's a lot of information in this report, but I think, as you said earlier on, another report we were looking at, sometimes it's the information that's not there is perhaps the most revealing. So I was quite interested to look at it in terms of, are we taking the best options with beach huts? And couldn't actually come to those conclusions from this report. So there's obviously been an increase in bookings. In fact, that figure wasn't there, but you've actually increased occupation by 50%, up to 50% from 29 in the last year. But I had to sort of work that out myself. And it's not possible in here to see the differences in income between chalets and the wooden huts. I think it would have been useful to have an idea of the number of assets that are generating this income of each type as well, because I think that would have helped us understand things a little bit more. So the upshot for me was I couldn't tell whether it is financially beneficial for us to rent out the beach huts on a weekly basis, as we are doing with some of them, or is it better for them to be on an annual basis? There wasn't sufficient information for me here to be able to do that. There wasn't information on the waiting list that I would have wanted to have seen. I know Renata knows that we've discussed waiting lists as well, so that's not a new issue. I felt I couldn't get a strong sense of what the strategy was behind this. What were we trying to work towards? There just wasn't enough there for me. And I'd have hoped we could have justified our approach from this report, and I personally don't feel I can do that from this. So I do have some concerns in terms of what I've got in front of me.
You wish to respond, Officer Guthrie?
Thank you. So the strategy was in the Beach Huts and Chalets review in 2018. I'm happy to provide additional information on waiting lists and the number of units and the split between them. I can provide that for the next meeting, if that would be helpful.
That looks good.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I had to switch back on.
Okay. Are you content with?
Yes.
With that? Thank you. Right. Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the condition survey and maintenance, first of all, it only talks about chalets, but I wonder if that's just an error. But we don't seem to be aiming to have any in good condition, which seems rather a shame. And I wonder if that has any reflection on the actual take up. And we don't seem to spend an awful lot on repairs and maintenance, which is obviously reflected in the condition. And I wondered if you'd like to speak to that. Thank you.
So we are looking for a good condition. The condition survey information provided is the current rating. So there are a proportion of them satisfactory and others that are in poor condition. The repair and maintenance work this year has been on hold, really waiting for the main programme of works, which is due to start November. I think it has had a possible impact in uptake, but I think the majority of the reason of lack of performance perhaps on the chalets is really to do with marketing and reach to people. So I think that is sort of the key issue. But we want customers to be satisfied that when they arrive they've got good value for money, and I think perhaps the condition that they don't have that at the moment. Have I answered everything, or is there anything sort of further that perhaps you'd like clarification on?
That's fine, as long as we're striving for good, that's great. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are we all done? No. Councillor Cushing.
Thank you. Just a very quick question, Mr. Chairman. Well, I see that the projections go forward to 2021. I mean, do we have any idea what the projections would be beyond that? So just looking at this current year, if I'm reading this correctly, it looks like we're making about roughly just shy of £50,000 profit on the chalet huts. Are we anticipating that sort of level of margin would continue going forward?
I'll hope it will increase. So the way that we can increase it is through adjusting how we advertise and manage and our fees on the weekly lets. So I've done some analysis which could, if they were fully let, might generate up to 100,000. There would be, so at the moment we're about £38,000 for those weekly lets. So and that ignores all the beach huts that we have on an annual. So I think it will improve. There'll be some additional costs that we have in terms of cleaning those units, but I do hope that that will grow. So I have proposed to change the pricing and just change the format so that we increase the peak season, so it extends past the usual 6-week period, that we offer a mid rate. So I'd increase pricing between the sort of low rates that we had and the peak rate, and that we remove our winter offering, which was £21 for a week. That had very little take up and didn't appear to be viable. So we're now offering, or looking to offer, a block booking, which I hope will also generate additional income. So proposing a bit of a change for next year, and to try that and see what happens, and I can report back in the next annual update as to how that's worked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just wonder, Mr. Chairman, whether it might be useful for us at some point to actually see what those projections might be, because obviously that feeds into the medium financial term strategy.
Would you be able to provide that perhaps for the next meeting?
Yep, I can do that. That's fine.
Okay, thank you. Any others? Councillor Seawood.
Just to say, coming back on Councillor Halliday's point about repairs and maintenance, the reason I'm particularly anxious that these refurbishment works start is that I think if we're going to generate income and increased income out of beach chalets and huts, is that we have to have a good offer. And there is some concern about the condition of some of them, and that's why it's important that these works are carried out, and it is a significant investment. I don't particularly want to say what the cost is publicly, but I can let you know.
Okay, thank you. We are asked to receive and note this as an update. Are you content to do that? You don't need a proposal, do you? No. Are you content to do that? Okay, I see nodding heads. Right, thank you very much. That's item 13. Turning to item 14, which is the North Walsham High Street Heritage Action Zone project update. And we don't have Councillor Kershaw here today. Are you standing in his stead, Councillor Seawood?
Yes, I think this is my last input.
You are multi-rolling today.
But I suppose if there's one project I do live, breathe and sleep, it's HAS at the moment. Yes, I get all kinds of things said to me about it. But we're just finalising tomorrow the end of the second round of an enormous amount of consultation that's taken place on this. It is set out on page 111 of the report. We've had 3 days of exhibitions in 5 different locations that are by Thursday. We've had a meeting with local businesses. There's meetings with accessibility groups. We sent out 1,500 letters to residents. The town council had a meeting last night, which was a public meeting as well. So I don't think anybody can say we aren't doing our best to get to consult and see what the people of North Walsham want. Just a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, in the surveys that were done about the town, residents actually very much like living in North Walsham, which was good news. If there was a reservation, it was about the town centre. And historically, and the challenge we face is that we simply lose too much retail business away from the town, that we want to retain more of it in the town. in essence, we want people to come into the town, stay there and spend money. So, I mean, that sort of is what drives all of this. The second thing is that whatever we do, whatever approaches we adopt, we will take a lot of the people with us, but you cannot, when you're doing this, take everybody with you. There's always going to be differing views. But we are coming to the end of the consultation process now, and the major challenge we're now facing is to actually get on and do the works. And we've got a pretty tight time scale to get through that in this financial year. So from now on onwards, yes, we have to analyse the consultation, we will have to do some tweaking, but the important thing now is that we move on and we actually start the works in the town centre and also in the Lokes. There is also, just to add, the scheme that's also around to on offer for properties within the town centre to receive, in my view, very favourable grants to enhance and improve their properties, particularly the frontages. So that is where we are. I think Rob Young is with us. I think he might have a presentation or something
Got him on screen
to say. So I hand it over to him.
Over to you, Officer Young.
Morning. I'm actually sitting in the office downstairs and it's a bit rowdy at the moment. So I'll just go through, I think Eric's kind of introduced the Heritage Action Zone programme overall. The report outlines the various different elements of it, and I've provided links within that report to an online platform that we're using, which hopefully people have explored and they'll be familiar with. We're using that tool to lead the consultation process on the improvement works to the town centre. And as Eric said, I think he mentioned that the period ends tomorrow. It's actually on the 15th, but then there's an extended period in which we hope to receive further responses from young people, and the team are in the town today actually doing a workshop with accessibility groups to understand the town and how it functions from their perspective, and also later on today they're going to Paston College to undertake a sort of workshop event with students there. So it's the proposals are very much still live for consideration, and if you bear with me, I'll share my screen and let you give you a flavour of what we're consulting on and some of the issues that have come to light so far. So if you just bear with me a second and I will do a share screen. Can everybody see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Great. Okay. So this is just the outline slide that we've used in a range of public consultation events so far, in which we've introduced the Heritage Action Zone and all its sort of multifaceted elements, including the building improvement grants, which Eric's just mentioned. We've talked about the highway proposals and then what we're terming the public realm designs, and I'll show you the sort of nuanced differences between those in a minute. And at each one of these events we've had a question and answer session, but I'll skip over that, but obviously be available to answer any questions at the end. This slide just outlines the funding partners and the project team. We're working with a range of different professionals on designs for what we're calling placemaking. And are kind of partnering with Norfolk County Council on this because obviously there are highways scheme elements of it. So the different parts of the consultation again have been broadly outlined to you, but there's a sort of a range of different drop-in events. We held a virtual event on Monday evening, which was another sort of interesting and fairly novel way of getting a chance to explain the proposals and get some feedback. There are questionnaires and sort of various different online means by which people can feed into this as well. But you can see the programme there includes a wide range of different activities, which actually have been extremely well attended so far. The business event was not hugely well attended in terms of numbers, but there was there was a really strong level of interest and engagement from those in the room. We had some really enlightening discussions with businesses about how they saw the proposals from their perspective. Today, as I've said, it's more focused on people with accessibility needs, and there's actually a walk around the town with people to identify the sites that we're talking about and the proposed, sort of talking detail, point at the real things on the ground about the things, the changes that we're suggesting would be made. So that's the programme of consultation, and the issues that have sort of driven this. We've done a range of different engagement events leading up to this point, which really identified these four things: that improving public realm was something which people felt were important, improving the safety of the town centre and opportunities for active travel, so it's walking and cycling into and around the centre. The identity of North Walsham is really what led to us being successful, the council being successful in getting the Heritage Action Zone set up in the first place. So, the town's history is clearly what drives this scheme, and possibly what we can use as a follow-up to help to market the town and to create a brand that it really needs, so that it is a place which people choose to visit. But if that's rooted in its history as well as its sort of attractiveness, and community pride is what has really helped North Walsham obtain this sort of large improvement scheme. It's the work that people within the town had already done to sort of fight for improvements and also make their own steps towards improving the town prior to us setting up this project. So the town centre proposals, I'm afraid you can't see the detailed wording of this slide, but you can see the areas that it outlines. These slides are all available, or these maps rather, are all available on the social pinpoint platform that I've referenced earlier. The lighter sort of yellow area is the highways and pavements where proposals are intended to be made, and then the darker areas are those sort of public realm sites which are being treated as sort of individual sites where improvements and landscaping projects will be undertaken. I should say we chose to consult on a single scheme. We had a debate earlier on about whether or not we should come out with options, because obviously a range of different options were developed in reaching this point. And it was decided that actually it's best to consult on the preferred option and then to test how that impacts on the various different interests in the town. So that's what we're doing, and we'll obviously have a look at the feedback received and if necessary adapt that proposal. So the highways proposals, I won't go into detail. I'm assuming that people will have the opportunity to explore these online, but what this slide shows is the sort of walking time averages of these different sort of isobars, or whatever you want to call them. So this is a 1 minute average walking time from Bankloke car park. It's measured from the town centre, so you can sort of see how reasonably accessible the town centre is. And this is important from the point of view of if we are going to end up removing some car parking from Marketplace itself, then it demonstrates that actually that it's not very far, even from the furthest of the car parks that we operate, New Road car park. It's still only a 3 minute average walk into the town centre. So it's a pretty well accessible town by foot already, and the aim of this is to sort of improve the areas which are causing problems, the pinch points and the narrow pavements and the like. Some more detail about the highways proposals, which I can't go into in detail here, but these sort of pinky areas, salmon sort of coloured areas, are proposed to be raised platforms. So that's areas where there are pinch points and issues with pedestrian crossing and conflicts with vehicles. Making these raised platforms basically makes the road surface the same level as the pavement makes it easier. Easier accessibility for all town centre users and slows traffic down. There are proposals for specific permit holder parking, that's for the hearse to access the church, and loading bays and parking for people with disabilities. And the bus stop at this end of the main street and a loading bay there. I'll mention the bus stop because there's a proposal to remove through traffic from the town. That there's, we're receiving feedback about the hours in which this would operate and some of the details, but there is a proposal certainly to remove heavy goods vehicles and buses from travelling through the centre. And in order to accommodate suitable public transport, we've got a bus set down and access point at a bus stop at that end of the town, but also a bus turning interchange at the New Road car park is proposed alongside this. This is a sort of schematic which shows what that would look like in reality, and the awnings that you can see over the shops could be something which could be fundable in principle, subject to listed buildings consent, etc., but from the building improvement grant. So it's to make the town more pedestrian friendly, more accessible, more attractive for traders and for shoppers and people doing business in and around the town. Another schematic which shows the kinds of floor materials that could potentially be used and are likely to be proposed as part of any final scheme. The public realm areas that I mentioned are at Bank Loke, Black Swan Loke, the area through the churchyard, through to towards the Vicarage Street car park, and the area in front of between the Shambles and the Hop Inn. And the proposals at the moment take this sort of form. We've shown sort of schematics about what kinds of look and feel these sites could have, with sort of examples of materials that have been used in other locations. So that's the Black Swan Garden, as it's referred to, in front of the Black Swan pub, which is here. Currently, this wall is unattractive, but sort of forms a boundary around the site which the council recently purchased, and the intention is to improve that site. This could be an example if the Go-Go Hare is removed from its current location in front of the Hop Inn, to accommodate the proposals for that part of the site. It could be relocated into this new sort of garden area. This is the bit leading up to the churchyard. So the Shambles is to the north of that, the Hop Inn to the south. So a suggestion that this become terraced and therefore better usable by, sorry, I thought there was a schematic that showed people sitting in that area. So it could be, a sort of sitting out area in a far more sort of desirable environment than it currently is. It's currently a sloping site. And we would hope to be able to improve some of the property, the backs of the properties as part of the same scheme. And again, making the walk through St Nicholas Churchyard more obvious as a sort of desire line for accessing the town centre. There are multiple routes that currently one can take. And again, these are examples of the sorts of materials that could be used. That's the one I was looking at. So by terracing the area in front of the Shambles, that becomes a far more usable space than it currently is. For those of you familiar with the town, the Go-Go Hare currently sits around about here. So introducing planting, landscaping, and some hard landscaping. The top concerns that were expressed sort of prior to us embarking on this consultation, concern about removing buses and parking negatively impacting on businesses, and we've had extensive dialogue with businesses around that. Investing in the public realm won't bring more businesses to the town? Well, I mean, fundamentally, this is motivated towards improving the vitality and viability of the town centre. And there's a good body of evidence to suggest that by making improvements, it does bring footfall, which consequently brings business investment. Accommodating the market was an initial concern, and the designs that we've got satisfactorily accommodate the market, and we've had a good dialogue with the market operators and the market stall holders, and they seem to be content with the way the proposals meet their needs. And then impact on the wider road network around the town, around the town centre, which is something which will be investigated as part of the feedback. We've had pedestrian and vehicle counters within the centre, and the brown line here, the sort of redder line, is vehicle counts, and the blue line is pedestrians. Particularly, you can see Thursday, obviously the number of vehicles is virtually nil because the town is pedestrianised on a market day. So vehicle counts were down, pedestrian counts are up, and I suppose you could suggest that's the kind of outcome that we're looking for, reducing the amount of impact between pedestrians and vehicles, making it easier for pedestrians to access businesses around the town. And the three charts here show the one at the top is the full data set. The daily average during term time is the second one, and then during the summer holidays is the third one. This was only over a short period of time, but we'll continue to do that as we progress. This is the slide just suggesting some case studies from elsewhere where the correlation between town centre improvements and sort of vitality of the town link it has been made, and that there are other more local case studies that we hope to be able to bring as evidence. This is a slide which shows the potential layout of the market if the proposed scheme goes ahead. And the impact on the wider road network will be analysed by colleagues at Norfolk County Council, and we'll have traffic counters at various different locations around the town to understand how, by changing the vehicular routes through the town, how they may affect adjacent roads. So I think that's probably all I need to do. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the placemaking proposals, but I'd be happy to answer any questions about that specifically or about anything HAS related. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Officer Young. That's obviously a useful addition to what we've got before us today as an update. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Rob, for that update. Really useful. Certainly is a good level of awareness, I think, in North Horsham about the HAS, and generally a very good level of support as well. Certainly that's something I pick up as the county member for North Horsham West, and I'm working with highways on a number of those things that you mentioned there, Rob. Just two things. I was looking for the word learning in the report and I found it, so that's great. But it is just one line there. So I just think, could I make a plea that we really do push what is really an amazing opportunity to work with young people here in North Horsham to understand what heritage means to them. It's not always, I'm going to phrase this, a sexy thing perhaps for them to think about heritage, but actually I think understanding what it means in terms of identity and belonging for young people is really important, and this presents a great opportunity to work with schools. You mentioned the college, that's really good, and if I can support you on that, I will do. Secondly, just a more practical question. The building improvement grant scheme, what percentage is that offering? I haven't had a chance to look on the social pinpointing. So what percentage grant is that offering to businesses? And does that depend on what they're wanting to do with their building?
Yes, I think you've answered your own question. It does depend. We can be flexible about the intervention rate, so-called intervention rate, so the amount that we would expect businesses to bring to the table. It will depend on things like well, the nature of the proposals they're making, the kind of end use, how extensive those things are, whether they're sort of superficial or whether they're fundamentally changing buildings to bring new uses to them. So we can be flexible, and we're willing to have dialogue on a sort of scheme by scheme basis.
Flexible on to what? Can you give me a
In terms of the amount of intervention, potentially up to 100%.
Up to 100%. Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Adams.
Yeah, just a couple of additional questions on the grants for property renovation improvements. I'm just sort of thinking, what can we learn from this that we might be able to apply to other localities, or indeed again to North Walsham? I think, you know, I do to a certain extent feel that this is something that may have been lacking in North Norfolk, and you know, it's something I think a various number of communities could benefit from. You know, we're sort of seeing examples, I think, pop up where conservation area appraisals, I appreciate this is jumping over into planning, can't necessarily be relied upon anymore because there's been quite a bit of damage done to certain heritage assets. But secondly, related to that, what are we actually going to do to monitor that in a longer term? For instance, you know, factors such as properties being sold, what's sort of stopping, you know, these sort of positive changes being undertaken that protect the heritage, and then someone coming along and just putting a load of UPVC windows in a few months later. So perhaps you've thought about those sort of topics and might be able to tell me more. Thank you.
I'm happy to comment on that. I mean, in North Walsham specifically, the vast majority of the buildings in the town centre are listed buildings. Some of them actually grade 2 star listed buildings. So there are controls over things like UPVC windows. The whole of the centre is a conservation area, hence its designation as a heritage action zone. So, but it's a really interesting point actually. What we do want to be clear is that this is it's an integrated program of works. We are doing these, proposing these town centre sort of physical improvements to the spaces, but also seeing wanting to improve buildings that reflect those improvements. So you know, you've got the kind of horizontal spaces and the vertical spaces, if you like, being improved in tandem, and we want that to be a sort of seamless, holistic scheme. So we're working with property owners and encouraging them to undertake the works that you know would be beneficial for them as business owners, alongside the sort of townscape improvements that we're making, and I think that integrated approach is going to be beneficial, and sort of reinforced by the package of the cultural programming package, which is bringing events to the town, and you know, sort of new reasons to market the town and bring people into the town, whether they're local people or visitors, you know, holiday makers. What we hope this scheme will bring to North Walsham is a legacy. It's not just physical improvements, it's not just building improvements, and it's not just events that come and go. We hope that this will catalyse town centre businesses to sort of come together in a new business forum, and it will encourage them to continue to work together and then, you know, promote their own centre and market the town in a different way. As you know, there are some great examples elsewhere in North Norfolk district as well as nationally, of how that can happen. So we think by making this investment, we can then you know, sort of enthuse business owners to pick up that momentum and then carry it forward. We would hate to see that this sort of 3 or 4 year program of investment just comes to the end once the money has been spent. So that's what we're working on, and we're actually undertaking a workshop with businesses on the 20th of October to try and encourage them to get together and appreciate the sort of mutual benefits of getting behind this and developing that legacy now, so that when we've spent the money and moved on, the businesses are able to continue that momentum. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got 2 more. Councillor Cushing, Councillor Gett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say, speaking as a Fakenham District Council, I look on with envy at what is being lavished on North Walsham, and indeed wish them luck in that. Now, I understand in Councillor Seward's update, and I always try to hang on to every word that you utter, you said something about there are grants to improve shop frontages. What are these, and is anyone other than North Walsham allowed to apply for?
Now, this is part of the project. It's the building renewal grants that they relate to both buildings and frontages. So it can just be a frontage. It could actually be some improvement to the buildings, and it is part of this scheme. Hopefully, one of the things that can come out of it is that how well we do with that scheme will actually then give us lessons about what we could do somewhere else. I think the challenge we're going to have is that we can have such a grant scheme. We can put it out there. What we can't do is actually force people to come to us and do it. And there are certain buildings in the town centre that are in desperate need of some renovation to make them reflect properly the conservation listed building status of the town. And challenge is going to be is to ensure that we get those buildings in the net. I'm sure you've got the same in favour. Problem we've got is that we've got some shops in the town that very much the frontages reflect the conservation area, and there's others it's just, well, neon rubbish, I suppose is the best way of putting it, and it's trying to get everybody back up to the required level of what should be a conservation area, because if you can do that, then that will make the area not only more environmentally attractive, both to encourage people to come in and also to attract new businesses.
Chairman, if I may add to that, the details of the building improvement grants are on the website that I've provided a link to. So there's a separate sort of tab relating to building improvement grants, and there's a frequently asked questions element of that, which I can share with you now if you like, but I think it's possibly better use of time if you follow that up from those links.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gay.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I am lucky enough to represent North Walsham Market Cross, and so there are just a few words I'd like to add here at the end. Achieving this funding from Historic England was a very considerable accomplishment for this council and for the people of North Walsham. But the key thing, apropos of our earlier discussion with People Services, is that this was built on at each stage. It in fact began with a very small amount of seed corn funding for the Market Town Initiative, which came through scrutiny, as a matter of fact. And from the accomplishments from that, it helped to make the case to Historic England. And on the basis of that, then more money could be drawn in from the LEP, from the lottery, from other sources. And I think what I'd like to say here is that in order to achieve this, you need dedicated professional officers to elevate the levels of funding and build from small achievements into larger achievements. And I would like to thank and pay credit for our officers who have done this, because it was often done at very short notice. You need people who are willing and able to meet all of these deadlines. And I'd just like to record my thanks and say how pleased we all are about this. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. Perhaps a final question from me. I may have missed it, but I can't see any mention of Section 117, Crime and Disorder, of the Crime and Disorder Act, which my memory serves me correct, is all about ensuring, designing crime prevention and community safety is integrated into the design and all the range of proposals. Can you give me any assurances I'm not even sure whether that act is still, I believe it's still, it's extant, but I don't know. One sees very little mention of it these days. It used to be standard mention in pretty much nearly all papers going back a few years. So has that been integrated into this project?
Chairman, I can probably respond to that. Cabinet papers and formal papers to committees do include a section relating to crime and disorder and the impacts. Because this was a sort of a brief update paper with no proposals as such, then I hadn't completed that section of the report. However, the professionals that we're working with are familiar with the concepts of secured by design, for example, which is a principle that sort of architecturally places need to work in a way that designs out crime. So rather than police enforcement, it's about reducing the opportunities for crime to take place. So certainly those principles are sort of implicit within this, and the team is working on it. From the architects that we're using are sort of au fait with those concepts.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? Any other comments? No? I think we are asked to receive a note, if my memory serves me correct. To receive a note. Are you comfortable to do that? Are you happy that that's a reasonable update on where we are and where we hope to be going? Okay, right.
This is coming back for fairly regular updates at the moment, isn't it? Is that correct? Quarterly.
It is quarterly, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, right. So thank you very much indeed for that. And we move on then to item 16, which is the Cabinet Work Programme.
Yeah, I'll try and keep this fairly brief because I think we're heading for a record long scrutiny meeting. The main things to note there are just to draw attention to key decisions. There's certainly some coming up that I think will be of interest to the committee. News, contract extension, which was kind of touched on today with the waste update. Obviously, if there is a change in revenue that can be gained from recycler, that will have an impact on that contract. I think we've had a previous waste update that the funds that can be recovered from those materials changed significantly when certain countries stopped taking kind of waste paper and that kind of thing. So definitely of interest. And then looking forward, you'll notice there's 2 cabinet meetings in November to bring that December one slightly more forward. Review of car parking charges. Again, that's something the committee has looked at previously and I think would be interested in. Public conveniences, the progression of upgrades on those works. And there was mentioned during the housing reserves or use of housing reserves report on the use of Section 106 funds there. And that's, again, a report that I think would be of great interest to the committee. So appreciate whilst they're not on our work programme yet, perhaps they are likely items that would come up of interest to the committee.
Okay, just before we move on to the scrutiny programme, I think we have a need to make sure that we are a little bit better in linking up the Cabinet Work Programme with the scrutiny programme, and in particular making sure that pre-agenda papers are submitted in time for the pre-agenda meeting so that we can perhaps make better, or should I say more efficient use of our time. So I just make that comment at this point. I'm aware that we've got a meeting scheduled which will address future working arrangements, particularly the panels. And so I will stay my comment on that until that meeting's being held, and we'll be able to report more on that at the next meeting of this committee. So moving on to overview and scrutiny work programme.
Yep, like I said, I think there are several key decisions coming forward. I appreciate that the November meeting looks a bit light at the moment. I don't think that will remain that way. I think the key to the scrutiny programme is flexibility, because we're not always sure when reports will be coming forward. We are expecting, if going back to that cabinet work programme, there's a review of the delivery plan, which I think certainly would come to scrutiny. It's of interest, and I think you need to know when things are planned to be delivered. I have also had a inquiry, it's not been confirmed yet, on whether the tree planting, an update on the tree planting project could come to November. So that's a potential item as well. The Market Towns initiative process review on there and monitoring, I'm waiting for a response on projects in 2 outstanding towns. As long as we get that information in time, hoping to bring that to the November meeting. One thing I have been kind of discussing with Rob Young, and hopefully he's spoken to Virginia about this, is the possibility of holding or going on a reef visit after the November meeting. So essentially, when everyone from the committee and anyone else that wanted to attend is available and here in the building, perhaps, you know, certainly if the next meeting doesn't go on as long, we'd have a lunch break and then head over to the reef in the afternoon to do a visit, and that will be when the site is open, so you can see it all kind of functioning and working.
Okay, thank you. Did you wish to respond to that, Councillor Gay?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say that, yes, I was aware. Thank you, Matt. And I think an earlier meeting was offered, but I think it was your preference, Chairman, to do it later. Is that correct? When things were completed?
Is your mic on? Yes, it is.
Yes,
I can
it
see
is.
it does.
Yes,
Yes,
I'm not close enough to it. That's
a little
the trouble.
closer might be helpful.
Yes. So sorry, Chairman. I just said, yes, I was aware of this proposal, and I thought it was your preference to have a later visit after completion, because I think there'd been some discussion around a slightly earlier visit. But yes, with this, a visit for overview and scrutiny has been being planned for quite a while.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll provisionally make arrangements around that. Okay, anything further to comment on the annual work programme or the action list? Outcomes and action.
The only other thing I might mention, Chairman, there's on the outstanding items at the very end of the overview and scrutiny work programme, there is an item there to monitor resource implications for the homelessness strategy. And I think we can fairly confidently say that was very much covered today by those 2 reports on the people services restructure and the use of housing reserves. That's not to say that is now something that's complete. I'm just kind of suggesting that, you know, we have seen from that original strategy, I don't think it was clear, it's quite a long time ago now, how that was going to be implemented, and now we're seeing what is required to do that. So that's something to note. Also, just looking at the we have an actions log there, just to say that we have several outstanding actions. We're still waiting to hear from East on a response in regards to the there was a letter that I prepared and sent on rapid response vehicles, on the location of the district's community first responders. I know, Victoria, you chased that. Thank you for that. So I think we're still waiting to hear from them. So yeah, and then you'll see there's another one there. The review of business rates debts, that information was presented at the start of the meeting. So yeah, we're getting through those. It just needs to be chased a bit more, essentially.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions in relation to those work programmes? Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Can I just ask you, Matt, if the review of the installation and running or performance of the uniform computer project, will that be included in the planning performance review in January?
Yes, that is absolutely the intention, and we're trying to push to get that slightly earlier if we can, but whether that will happen or not, that was supposed to come now or earlier in the year, and I think the CLT response is that they want to delay until Martin Fulcher has been in post for long enough to perhaps address some of the concerns before it's scrutinised. So we'll get that forward as soon as we can, but certainly one of the key aspects of that will be uniform.
Thank you, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, any others? No, okay. Are you content then to receive and to note the work programmes? Okay, I see nodding heads. And that, I think, is our last item on the agenda. Thank you very much indeed for a rather long meeting, your contributions today. I think it does reflect some of the importance and the volume that we've got on the agenda today. And I think whilst we can't always plan our agendas with great precision, I think that there's, as I said earlier, there's some work that we can do to perhaps even out some of the workflow and make sure that we don't have too long meetings. Right, okay, well, thank you very much indeed, as I said, and I formally close the meeting.